Hey, what's up? Welcome to Basscraft. So I'm putting this episode out on a Sunday. Usually get them out on a Wednesday, but I'm going on tour tomorrow, so I just want to get one out before I head away. Just doing another Crow Black Chicken tour in the UK. First one of 2022. Happy New Year, by the way. Looking forward to getting out loads of podcasts again this year. It'll probably be once a month, but don't worry, the quality will remain the same. Just heading up and down England with Crow Black Chicken, and even getting to do our first Scottish gig in Edinburgh and Kinross, so I'll put the tour dates in the description. Today I'm chatting to Dave Swift. So I'm sure a lot of you have heard of Dave Swift, and if you haven't, you definitely have seen him on the telly, because he's been in the Jools Holland band for over 30 years. Anyone who knows what that show is aware of all the amazing musicians who come on it, and if you're not aware of what the Jools Holland TV show is, you're listening in America or something. Basically, it's a music show on the BBC that's been going for like 30 years. There's also been a radio show, and any musician who's like touring an album or just for any reason comes on the show and just plays, and it's just excellent. And I think Dave described it best. Usually the shows on TV are a lot of talking with a bit of music, but the Jools Holland show is a lot of music with a bit of talking, and that's why people love it, and that's why it's lasted so long as it has. So yeah, Dave is an amazing bass player, plays upright and electric, a lot of upright on the show, but equally proficient on both instruments. And we just chat. This is a long one. If you're on the podcast app, it's a two-parter. So we chatted for over 2.5 hours. So I really appreciate him giving me that much time, and just some amazing insights, because he's had such a brilliant career, and he's an educator as well. So we got to chat about everything from being a session bassist, educating, and bass collecting. So when you put those three topics together, you know it's going to be a long one. So I hope you enjoyed this. I put all Dave's information in the description, and as usual, if you could subscribe to the podcast, all that stuff, it really helps me out. I've got merch in the store still. Probably won't print more t-shirts, so if you want to buy the last few, grab it. And like I said, thanks for all the support in 2021. I really appreciate it. I do these kind of Instagram live things at the moment. I don't know how many of you are on Instagram. Follow me on there at Stephen McGrath Bass. So I'm catching up with former guests once a month live, so you can ask questions. So I've already had Scott Whitley on and Simon Francis, and it was really fun, so I'm going to keep doing that. So follow me on Instagram to join in on those live chats where I catch up with all guests. And yeah, that's it, guys. See you soon. Great. It was your birthday yesterday, was it?
2 days ago. Actually on the 11th. Yes, thank you very much. Thank you.
21 again is now.
If only. No, actually, I take that back. I don't think I would like to be 21 again. Maybe physically, possibly, but I think every other aspect of it, I'd much rather be 58 than 21.
Yeah, the thought of doing all those things you would have done at 21 just makes you tired even thinking about them.
Yeah, and all the mistakes, all the things that you got wrong, I just couldn't bear the thought of going through that again.
Yeah, I don't like to think about it either. Thank God there was no technology back then to record it forever.
Oh my goodness, yes, that's right, captured forever in a day.
Brilliant. So, well, sure, we'll start. What was the beginning of your bass journey, I suppose? Because you're different. I think you're the first person I've had on that started on a brass instrument. That's pretty cool. Beginnings on the bass.
I mean, to be honest with you, it's not that uncommon. There's quite a few players that I know that did start on it, particularly the trombone, and particularly American guys. If you read a lot of interviews with American bass players, a lot of them started off on brass instruments first. But yeah, I mean, obviously for me, singing, it started with singing in school and church choirs. So that happened for a long time. And my brothers played guitars at home. But I think for me, I always liked the idea of playing an instrument. And I tried the guitar and I tried the piano we had at home. And I just didn't bond with it. I just didn't bond with any of them. So when I went to secondary school, I really wanted to play the saxophone because I'd been watching Top of the Pops, and it seemed to be that the sax player, when there was one, always looked very cool. It looked a really cool instrument. And so I went to the school and asked if I could play one of those. And I went to one of these open evenings with my parents, and they have all the sixth formers playing the instruments, and there wasn't a saxophone in sight. They didn't have one. They just had flutes and clarinets and things like that. And I really didn't fancy those. And I saw a trombone in the case, and I just thought, that looks like fun. But unfortunately, they gave that to somebody else. I ended up with a euphonium, which, for people who are not familiar with this, like a mini tuba. And I thought to myself, hang on, how have I gone from wanting to play the saxophone to ending up with a euphonium? So I played it for about 6 months. I studied with the teacher there, and I just gave up because I thought this isn't what I want to be doing. So years later, when I was 14, I got another chance at playing. So I stuck with the trombone. I went to a teacher at my school, and he didn't want to take me on. Well, it wasn't him, it was the school, really, because they thought I was too old at 14, because I'm on the verge of leaving school, and they only really wanted these teachers to take on pupils who had many years ahead of them to get competent on the instruments. So, but he stuck his neck out for me, and he said, because I saw some potential in you, so he said, I got you the trombone. You went away for 2 weeks, which I remember doing, and I just loved it so much. I fell in love with the instrument, came back, and he took me on as his pupil. And I actually met up with him last year.
Oh, brilliant.
I hadn't seen him for almost 40 years. And so it was a good opportunity for me to thank him, because that early training on the trombone, he taught me how to read music. And of course, bearing in mind, the trombone slide has no set positions. So when I took up the bass a year later, when I was 15, and I took up double bass and fretless bass guitar, the trombone was great training for that, because I'd already, had to use my ears a lot to sort of get my intonation correct, and also the muscle memory of the positions on the trombone. Same with double bass. There aren't any markings on there, so it was a perfect instrument for me to transition onto the bass, really. So
it's quite different in the way you play. It's quite a melody-based instrument. Unlike if you had been playing the tuba, you would have been learning pretty much bass guitar without on a brass instrument.
Well, I do play tuba as well, but I mean but to a lesser extent. But I mean, I was a professional trombone player when I left school. I was actually making a living on it. But yeah, as you say, the trombone and the range of it as well is so huge that when I played the trombone, I had to learn to read 4 different clefs, because you literally have to read treble clef. Because if you're playing a brass band, everything's written treble clef. But then I was playing in orchestras, which wrote a lot in bass, tenor, and alto clef. Because, like I said, the instrument has such a huge range. So my reading was already sorted before I even picked up a bass. I could already read anything I needed to do that. So all I had to do a year later, when I took up double bass and bass guitar, and I was self-taught on that. I didn't have lessons to begin with. So all I had to do then was learn the mechanics of the instruments, because I could already read. And back then, everything that I was given as a bass player was written music. So it was almost like that was the hard part over and done with.
It was almost unbeknownst to you, you were getting set up to be a session musician, like doing that stuff that people don't want to do, learn how to read.
Yeah, exactly. And for me, it was a real joy as well. It wasn't a chore. I mean, I actually really enjoyed learning to read, and I enjoyed the discipline of it as well. That I really enjoyed that, because I wasn't a very good academic at school. I don't have any qualifications other than a few trombone exams. So for me to find something that I was really, finally passionate about and actually had some aptitude for was really important for me. But obviously it took me towards the end of school. Like I said, I was 14, 15 when this was happening, whereas most kids started to play instruments when they're much, much younger than that. But then a lot of them that I know didn't carry on with that. They didn't become pro players. So maybe the fact that I came to it so late and became that passionate about it so late, maybe that's what propelled me further on, and enabled me to have this career. So.
And do you think the reading is still important for players coming up today? Like, should they concentrate on that? If people are limited in their time these days, do you think it's something worth putting your time into?
I think it depends really, because a lot of people that I know, they learn to play by ear, and now they want to get into reading, and because they're older, they're finding it quite difficult. So I kind of think I probably did it a fairly good way around, because when I was kind of younger, I guess my brain was more sort of capable of taking on a lot more stuff, and I had that keenness to do it. But I mean, for me back then, it was a necessity. As a session musician back in the day, you had to be able to read music, because all the gigs and work I was doing, which was mostly kind of theatre work, studios. And it was you got given a piece of music with a written bass part. I very rarely, if ever, got a chord chart or someone said just make it up.
Yeah.
It was always written down. So if you couldn't read back then, you were done for. Now I think these days, in the session world, it's again a lot of the time if you're playing in more of like a commercial pop band, it is more a case of you'll get played a backing track and you've just got to come up with something. So in that instance, it's better to have good ears than anything else and be able to pick up things fast. But say, for instance, if you wanted to be an orchestral musician these days, or if you wanted to play in West End shows, you still need to be able to read to the highest level. You've got no choice. If you can't read, both of those things are off the table for you. But then again, if you don't want to do that, then you could argue that it's not that important. I mean, not everyone in the Jools Holland band reads music.
Yeah.
It's mostly me and the horn players that do. So, but we all end up playing with the same artists. We all end up playing the same tunes. So everyone who doesn't read finds their own way of doing it. But for me personally, it's still important to be able to do both. I still get called to play by ear, to improvise, but I also still get called to read written music. And if I could only do one or the other of those, it would limit my options and my earning capacity.
Definitely. Like I only ever did one reading show and I'm not a good reader. And I realized why it's so important for doing a musical, because it's a 2-hour show but almost nothing repeats. There's like little hits with the drums, and if you can remember all of the bass hits for the 2 hours, power to you. But to anyone listening, but I couldn't. So I barely got through it with the reading. But for those, it's just a different thing, isn't it? Those musicals, because there's so many little intricacies to the parts. Like,
sure, but they're quite coveted gigs, because if you actually get the gig, if you are the bass player on the musical, and it's a long run, you've got that job for years. And in the old days, a lot of, well, probably even now, a lot of musicians, the only way they could get mortgages were to take on West End shows, because it was the closest thing you could get to having a day job. Having a gig day in, day out, month, year after year, whatever. So they're really still quite coveted gigs. But then I suppose the downside to it is, you are playing the same thing every night, and you need to play it exactly the same. You need to have that consistency. But if you're happy with that, I mean, for me, I've depped on shows for people before. I've sat in and depped for them on occasions, but I've never actually done here in London a full show myself, because I've always been too busy touring, doing that side of it. And I kind of like that. I like that. I like the travel aspect when we can.
Oh yeah, well, I'm going over to you guys next week, so you're still rocking over in England, plenty gigs.
Well, yeah. So I mean, so far so good. I mean, we just finished a big tour with Jools Holland for 3 months, and none of it was cancelled. So that was good, But yeah, I mean, for me, it was crucial to be able to do both. But I would say now, at this point in my career, I do less reading than I've ever done before, because my wife, Lucy, is a professional jazz singer. So I do a lot of gigs with her on acoustic bass. And most of the time you're turning up playing with other jazz musicians, and you're just playing from the top of your heads. You agree on a list of classic jazz standards, and you're just playing them, and you're improvising and you're soloing, and there isn't anything written down. So ironically, these days, the need for me to read is a lot less than it used to be at the very beginning. It's kind of everything sort of switched around, So these days, for me, it's much more important to have good ears and to be able to pick up stuff fast, and also to have a good repertoire as well. I've noticed that, when I started out, and you'd be like in a function band, and you'd have a big pad of music, and the first lot of the pad would be like dance tunes, like foxtrots and waltzes and whatever. And then the second half would be pop stuff. But it was all written out, all the bass parts written, and you just turn the page and you play what was there. But these days, I don't even know if bands have those pads of music anymore. And I think what it's more a case of is the people you're working for expect the musicians just to have this vast repertoire of songs in their heads. And I get this all the time. I get called for gigs, and you've got to be able to play sort of old school R&B blues. You've got to play bebop. You've got to be able to play funk, dance music, and there's nothing there. You've just got people calling out tunes or giving you keys.
Yeah.
And this is the reason why then your ears need to be super developed to be able to cope with that. So it's there's a lot of stuff to think about there.
Yeah, I think a lot of the stuff is harder these days. It's funny. It's easier because you can have YouTube, but I think it's harder because YouTube is there and it's a shortcut. So like, if you want to learn a song, before you would have learned it by ear and you would have developed that muscle. But now the temptation is just like, oh, I'm sick of trying to learn this Jacko lick by ear. YouTube.
Exactly, and also you do have the benefit of with our phones, and you can get chord charts up there if you're really stuck. You can call upon chord charts, which and that is useful. I've definitely done that if there's something that I literally just don't know. Or sometimes you just have to. We did a session once years ago. We played with Jools. We played with Amy Winehouse quite a bit over the years, and we did some TV stuff with her. But one occasion she was a guest on Jools' radio show, his Radio 2 show, and we knew that she was the guest, but we weren't told what she was going to be performing, and it was just the rhythm section of the band. So she turned up at the studio, and we all said, "Hi, how you doing?" and stuff, and we're all excited, great to see her. But we're all sitting there thinking, "What on earth are we going to play? Because we've got to record it like in the next 20 minutes." So she decided on one particular track, and whoever she was with, her manager or agent, got the CD and played it in the control room.
Lovely.
And we had to sit there in front of Amy, and we had to learn it there and then on the spot. So, so they played through once, and we're all sitting there kind of going, "Oh yeah, it's this." Then we'll say, "Can we hear it another time?" And you got the bits that you missed the first time. And I think at best we may have listened to it 3 times, but no more than that. And we knew that if we'd have had to ask like any more times, then it would have started to kind of, she would have probably got a little bit restless. Her manager we'd have started to feel a bit embarrassed, So I think, we got it pretty much after 2, perhaps 3 listens through, but this wasn't writing anything down. This was just learning it by ear on the spot.
No cheat sheets.
No. And then you've got to play it with Amy Winehouse, So
Crazy.
So that's one of the most extreme. And we had to do that a few times as an artist. You have to learn it right there on the spot, which, it's tough and it's a high pressure thing, but it's so good for you.
Yeah.
It's great for your ears, and it just makes you sort of rise to the occasion, really. So yeah, it's very good training.
And when you're doing that, are you thinking in like it goes to the 5, to the 1, to the 4, that kind of thought process, or are you just like playing it by ear and just following your ear?
Yeah, I think it's more the latter, to be honest. I mean, I do use, if I'm doing some charts, really, really quick charts, I will use Roman numerals. I will use the number system. But I think in that instance, because I'm a big melody fan as well. When I'm playing bass with a lot of artists, and some people say, "Oh, I just listen to the drums is key," and I'm not saying it's not important, but for me, actually, the melody is really important for me. I mean, I bounce off that quite a lot, and I sometimes phrase with singers. So I think I just generally listen to it more as a song, as opposed to going through it thinking that's the 1, that's 6, whatever. I think that for me would cloud my mind even more. I just try and just play it as musically as possible. But again, it just comes from a lot of years of experience, because this year I've been in the industry for 41 years, so I'd like to think that my ears are at least half decent.
That's and I think with that kind of experience, like you'll make choices outside of the obvious notes. Like I was transcribing a Guy Clark song yesterday to play with a friend of mine, and I got the chords wrong. I was playing like the 3rd over one of the chords because I was following the melody, like you were saying. So you might make more interesting choices on the bass when you're following the melody than just being stuck to the chord progression.
Absolutely, and also phrasing as well. Sometimes it's as much about the way you phrase things by listening to we just did Jules's New Year's Eve TV show, and we had Joy Crooks on there, and the song that we did with her, there's triplets in it, like triplet crotchets, which is like the melody that she's singing, and I was definitely hitting those triplets with her, because it felt the natural thing to do, sort of thing. So yeah, it's a melodic thing as well, but it's also kind of rhythmic, which is why I like to listen to the the vocalist so much.
That's interesting. It's a really good approach. Like, not as many people talk about doing it that way.
Sure. Well, yeah, I mean, sometimes it's just, if you're just kind of following the drums, which again, you should. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, but it can also then prevent you from being a bit more creative. Whereas if you've got something else that you can bounce off, and I guess you could say you could do it with the keyboard or the guitar, whatever. But I mean, I think for me the vocal is so important. That's what I focus on probably as much as anything else.
Are there any albums that come to mind with that? Like for me, Jacko's work with Joni Mitchell has a lot of that call and response with the vocal melodies. Are there any albums that you think people would listen to hear that kind of approach to bass? Like,
it's off the top of my head, it's kind of quite difficult to think. But I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, those are some of the best examples I can think of, because and it's obviously that thing that with Jacko and Joni. I mean, he had so much freedom there. And she wanted him to be as upfront as she was, as far as a performer. I think with me, it's definitely more. I'm in a lot more commercial situations where I'm not really able to be that flamboyant. I mean, sometimes people say to me, "Oh, why aren't you?" go a bit more crazy on TV with these things. And I always say the same thing. Well, I don't want to be fired.
Exactly. I was thinking the same thing. Yeah.
Because, I mean, the thing is, when I'm playing with Lucy, for instance, and we're playing jazz stuff, because like I said, I mean, I'm just playing improvised walking bass lines. So they're completely from the top of my head. But at the same time, they're still quite like a regular thing. They're nothing too crazy. I mean, it's different when I get to solo. But in a jazz setting, that's different. That's where the singer stops, and then it's my turn to shine. Whereas I think that the thing with Jacko and Joni, they were much more equal partners in that musical, and that's quite unique. I think unless you're in a setting where you've written stuff between you, or you're doing cover versions of those songs, I think it's very difficult to be that openly creative and that daring with it. For me, like I said, I play in such commercial situations that I just need to keep it like regular and steady, and it's just more a case of just the occasional bar where you can put a little fill in there or a slide, whatever, but I can't go too far with that, because we're playing with pop artists, we're playing with rock, funk, soul artists, and if I get too carried away, I'll probably get a dirty look.
Yes, I was thinking they might throw.
Someone will be doing this.
Yeah, that bass player has to go.
Yeah, exactly that.
But going back to switching from trombone to bass and double bass, like what kind of artists were influencing you at the time? Were you just listening to what was popular, kind of?
Okay, well, like I said, as a trombonist, because I really liked jazz when I was a kid. I mean, and anything that came on TV or and musicals as well. My family were a big fan of those MGM musicals and stuff. So, and a lot of jazz tunes came from those musicals. Actually, that's where a lot of the jazz standards came from. But I think when I remember when I switched to, well, I didn't stop playing the trombone. I just also started to play bass. So on double bass, I used to go to my local library in my hometown of Wolverhampton, and I used to, in those days, you could borrow records, and it sounds so ancient now.
Yeah.
You had to go into a building with your tickets to borrow vinyl albums. It just shows you how old I am.
They still do that in Cork, in the Rory
Gallagher
Library.
Okay.
There's a music library where you can borrow CDs.
Oh, fantastic! Well, I mean, and it was great. I loved it, and but I was always borrowing sort of because I thought to myself, well, who are the great sort of jazz double bass players that I need to listen to? And of course, the same names kept coming up, which was Ray Brown, Ron Carter, Niels Henning, Austin Pedersen. Most of these guys were playing with Oscar Peterson. So I knew that if I borrowed Oscar Peterson albums, then I'd be doing okay, because he always used fantastic bass players. So yeah, those were the main guys, particularly Ray Brown. And I had a bass method book called the Ray Brown Bass Method, which I still have. So yeah, I was listening to him a lot for double bass. But I remember distinctly with bass guitar, because obviously I was watching Top of the Pops at the time, and I used to love all that two-tone stuff, like the specials, the selector, the beats, and I really liked that kind of stuff. But then I also liked all sorts of, I love Kate Bush and Blondie, all sorts of things. But when the light bulb went off for me was when I was playing trombone in a band, and there was a fellow trombonist next to me who's a friend of mine to this day, and he said, "You've just started to play bass, haven't you?" I said, "Yeah, it's very recent." And he said, "You really need to listen to the guy on this album." He said, "I'll lend it to you." So he bought this album in, and I looked at it, and it was a Weather Report album, and it was Night Passage was the particular album, and I didn't know who Weather Report was, and I'm looking at the bass, who's this bass player, and I'm thinking, Jaco, Jack, what, what an unusual looking name. And I thought to myself, well, because up until this point, everything I'd been playing had been sort of quite sort of simplistic, there hadn't been anything, no solos or anything like that, just simple lines. And I put that album on and I listened to it and heard Jacko and Weather Report for the first time. And I just thought, oh my God. I thought, what have I done? What have I done? I just literally couldn't believe it. I was shocked, terrified, but elated all at the same time. And I remember thinking, I honestly remember thinking, I thought, that's the way you play the bass. That is how it's supposed to be played. It just, to me, what he was doing, and his dexterity and his speed and his note choices and his lyricism, everything just did this for me. And I just thought, that's it. That's how you play. And I did attempt to learn some of the stuff on there. I did a couple of transcriptions. I mean, not any of the really crazy complex stuff, but just more of his bass lines. Because to me, that he became the guy. He was the ultimate player. I thought, that's how you do it. That's how you do it. And I mean, for me now, he's still in my top three favorite bass guitarists of all time. He has to be in there. So that was quite a shock to the system. But like I said, it changed everything. So after that, I just wanted everything with him on. So I guess like Jacko for me was the early influence on bass guitar, and then on double bass it would have been guys like Ray Brown and Stanley Clarke, I guess. But Stanley's playing was so out there. I mean, at least with Ray Brown, I could actually work that stuff out. But Stanley was playing so fast, I didn't have the facility then to slow stuff down, kind of thing. So I just thought, okay, I'll leave that. I'll leave that to one side. And focus on the, but I never wanted, as much as I admired those guys personally, I never wanted to be a soloist. I never wanted to be an out and out fusion solo player or anything like that. I still enjoyed playing in a band environment, and I enjoyed providing that foundation and kind of making everybody else sound good.
Well, that's good for a session bass player. That's kind of the mentality, isn't it?
Because when I sang in the choir, I started off as a treble, then moved to alto, but eventually ended up singing bass. And that for me, just holding those low notes, singing those low notes, and giving that foundation, that bed, I was listening to the bigger picture, thinking this sounds and feels great to me. And that's how I felt when I became a bass player. As much as I loved and admired the flamboyance of Jacko and the technical ability and the virtuosic playing, I never thought to myself, that's what I want to do. That's the player I want to be. I just thought, you can take little elements of that and you can be inspired. But I just kind of thought with what I'm planning to do, which is, be more of a session band player, it was more important for me to listen to the more regular stuff that they were playing. the more accompanying type thing. But I still like all the flash stuff as well.
Yeah,
I just
that's
don't.
class,
I don't always admit it that much.
Did you ever watch the DVD? I had it years ago. Ray Brown, Oscar Peterson, and the Danish guy Oscar Pedersen. Have you seen that?
Oh, Niels Henning Orsted Pedersen. Well, interestingly, it's funny you should, because it's called. I think it's called Oscar Peterson and the Bassists Jam.
Yeah, it's
I
crazy
think
playing on it.
Okay, so check this out. So when I was at school playing the trombone, and I just started to play bass as well, we went on a trip to Norway with the school band, and I was in a music shop there, and I actually got that album, and it was vinyl, but of course it was all in Norwegian, so I couldn't read it, but I knew that it was Oscar and those two guys, and so I got it home and listened to it, and I thought, this is phenomenal. I listened to it all the time, and then decades later, maybe 30 years later, I was in New York, and I was in a record shop, and not only did I find it on the same thing on CD, which I thought was great, I then discovered there's a DVD of it. And I never knew this. So for like 30 years, I never knew that somebody had filmed that. I'd just only ever been listening to the record. So then I watched it, and I thought, oh my goodness, it's such a great opportunity to see them in action. Because obviously Niels Pedersen took over from Ray Brown in the Oscar Peterson trio. Ray started there, but it was a great, and that's the thing for me, learning to play the bass, because I had the occasional lesson. I had a couple of lessons with an orchestral player when I was early on, because I wanted to get my bow technique together. And obviously an orchestral player was the best person to study with, because they use a bow all the time. But for me, a lot of how I learned to play was just watching players. So on TV, I used to avidly watch Top of the Pops, and I would just be looking at the bass player's hands and what he was doing and how he was playing stylistically. And then, of course, when Jools had his TV series, The Tube, that he used to co-present with Paula Yates in the 80s, same thing, that all the live bands on there, I'm just watching how their hands are moving and how what are they doing. So I learned as much about playing the bass visually as I did anything else, So
it's kind of all you had to do back then, isn't it? You had to just watch Top of the Pops or
well,
get a DVD or something.
Well, because they and obviously, I mean, I started out in the late 70s, so there's very little resources. I mean, I had a couple of books. I had a couple of Carol Kay How to Play the Bass books, but I couldn't find a bass guitar teacher at all. They just, if there were some around, I wasn't aware of them. And it's the same with double bass teachers. Well, it took me a while to find one. Whereas these days, they're coming out the woodwork, people offering lessons. And especially if there's no gigs. But back then it was really tough. You had to just grab any little thing you could, a little bit of TV, something out of a book. I worked in a music shop for about 8 months in Wolverhampton. I worked in shop there, and that was pretty cool, because my manager, who was also like an early bass mentor to me, a guy called Craig Fenney, he was a great bass player, and he would show me stuff in the shop when we had quiet days. He also brought in some cassette tapes of Chaka that I hadn't heard. But then you'd also got players coming in who'd want to test gear out. I was only 17 at the time, so these guys were older. So I'd get to listen to them as well and watch them. So it was literally, you just have to I had to grab whatever I could, little snippets of information, and it was quite difficult to do, really, because it wasn't very organized. Like these days, you can go on courses, you can go on YouTube videos, but back then it was just clutching at straws.
But I think that as well, like back then, is good, because now you just take you kind of pass over this information and you think you've learned it, but it's gone. Yeah, but you think you've got it in, so you don't put the time in, because there's so much there. You don't get stuck into this one topic that you need to really stay on.
That's absolutely right. And the other thing that to add to that, and I don't wish to be unkind to people, but what I've noticed is, conversing with people online and in person, I think the people that are the most successful as musicians in this industry are the ones that have always go the extra mile to do something. So like I said, when I was a kid, I'd walk to the library, or I'd go to music shops and I'd buy music books and I'd do research. I was studying all the time, and I still do. Even today, I'm always studying. I'm always practicing. I just never stopped. And I think what's happened is some players have gotten a little bit lazy because I've noticed that some people just don't want to do the work, or they don't want to put in as much time, and even like research and stuff. So I get people coming to me and they'll ask me about a certain player, a certain style, a certain instrument. And I'll kind of think, okay. And then I'll go online and I'll just put in what they've asked me. And there's all these reams and reams of information. And I'm thinking to myself, well, why haven't they done that?
Mm.
Why have they come to me to ask me what they can find themselves like this on the internet? And I mean, okay, maybe sometimes it's because they want a connection, but sometimes I just kind of think it's just, they haven't got that sort of, that tenacity, that drive that you need to succeed in this industry. If you think I want to learn to do something, do the research, sort of look online, get a book, anything, but don't just kind of go to some person and say, well, how do you do that then? Or what do you think I should do and stuff like that? Because it's, you do need to have a lot of grit in this industry. You need to make an effort. You need to sort of work. You need to have some initiative.
Yeah.
Really, and I can often tell the people that don't have that, because like I said, it's like they're coming to ask me. It's like, I don't know everything, but I'll end up just going onto the internet and telling them what I've read, and I'm thinking, well, you should be doing that.
You make a good point. It's almost like you need to get that grit, because okay, you gave them the solution today, but you're not going to be there every time they need the solutions. They need to find their own way, and have put in their own work.
Yeah, exactly. I think people these days, they just like, not everyone, of course, but a lot of people like shortcuts, and they think life is about shortcuts, and it really isn't. I mean, I read a great book a few years ago called Bounce, and I can't remember the name of the author, but basically it's about debunking the myth of natural born genius. And it talks about a lot of athletes as well as musicians, and he just gives examples of where these people, and he's talking about people like Michael Jordan. I'm a big basketball fan, so that resonated with me. Tiger Woods, great tennis players, whatever. And it's because we only see the end product. We only see these guys in these competitions and tournaments, and we just see the polished version, and we see them moving so fast and scoring all these baskets, and we just kind of think it's God-given. They've got this God-given talent. It's a blessing from heaven, whatever. And actually, this book talks about it's the effort and the work they put in prior to that. It's more to do with the hours. Michael Jordan said, I've missed thousands of shots, thousands upon thousands. But obviously, if you keep doing that, you're practicing and honing that, so you make less and less mistakes. That's what we see the other end of it. But we don't see that because he doesn't want us to see it. We probably don't want to see it, but that's what's happening. Yeah. And it's the same with music. The reason why some musicians are so incredible at what they do is not just because they've just got this thing that's heaven sent or whatever you want to call it. It's just because they've worked damn hard. I just had to write a little mini article for a magazine on the famous American jazz bassist Charles Mingus, who's one of my favorite musicians. He was a great jazz bass player, but people probably know him more for his compositions. So, and again, that thing where if I'm asked to sort of write a little bit of stuff, I know a lot about him, but I don't know everything. So I did some research. I've got a couple of reference books, and I did some work. I read a lot more about Charles Mingus, and I learned stuff I didn't know about. He did study very early on when he was like 17 with because he was a trombone player as well. He studied trombone and cello, funnily enough, beforehand. But when he took up the double bass, he studied with another American jazz bass player, and this guy called Red Callender said, Mingus's thing at the time was that he wanted to be the greatest bass player that's ever lived. That's what Mingus would say. That was his mantra almost. And apparently, according to Red, the guy that taught him, he said, and after that, Mingus would often practice for 17 hours a day.
Oh my God, that's nuts.
And the same thing, Charlie Parker did the same thing. Now, it may not have been every day, but I bet he did it for like quite a while. And then he goes on to say the reason why Mingus could do, and Mingus was an amazing, he was a big guy, had these big sort of hands, but he was very agile. He was very, very fast, amazing technique. He really was a virtuosic player. His teacher said the reason why he could do all those things was because of the work he put in. It's because of those 17 hours a day practicing. He said that's how you get like that. That just doesn't sort of happen overnight, and you don't just have it within you. And it's tricky because I guess back then he probably didn't have much else going on in his life. So for him, that and of course he was dealing with sort of racism and social injustice, no doubt. So for him, it was like escapism as well. So it became even more important. It wasn't just a hobby. This for him was like escapism. This was a way to change his life. And the trouble, in modern day times, we've all got so many distractions. I became a dad only 4 years ago, so this late in life, and so obviously that takes up time. But admin stuff, I don't know. There's all sorts of things to take away from this. So that's the reason why when I was younger, that's when I did most of my practice. I didn't do 17 hours a day. And perhaps had I have done 17 hours a day, I would have been better than I am now.
Well, I don't know. Well, it depends what you're doing for those 17 hours. A lot of people they like to throw those numbers out there. Said I did 10 hours today, but it was it mightn't have been 10 good hours. It might have been better off.
That's true. That's true.
Good hours.
You can achieve very little if you're doing the wrong thing in 10 hours. But again, it's it really is. I guess what I'm trying to say in a nutshell is that. I think, if you want to be really good and very technically proficient, you just have to put in the time. It's as simple as that. You have to put in the hours, and it's about repetition. The more you do something and the more you repeat doing it, the better you're going to get at it. It's as simple as that. So, I think it's difficult because I think people want shortcuts these days. People see. They go on social media and they see people with all these followers and they see people getting endorsements, and they just want the shortcut. How can I get to that without and not realizing that? For me, for instance, I do have endorsement deals with a number of companies, but I was a pro musician for 15 years before I got a single endorsement. I was with Jools for like 4 or 5 years before I got an endorsement. Prior to that, I was on TV, but I was still going to the shop and buying strings and buying plectrums. Because as far as I was concerned, the guys that were getting endorsements, and deservedly so, were guys like Marcus Miller and Stanley Clarke and all this stuff. I didn't dream for 1 second that would happen to me. And it wasn't a priority. For me, it was all about the craft. The most important thing for me was was being the best musician that I could, and always learning, always studying, always evolving. And anything else I thought that happens is a bonus. But I've had messages sent to me by younger players, and the first thing they ask me is, how do I get an endorsement?
I don't understand this thing, because what do you want? Bass guitars are so cheap these days. The only endorsement I ever want is strings. How many bass guitars do you want? How many pedals do you want? And they're not even that dear, really, compared to what they were years ago.
Do you know what? The second bass guitar I ever bought, which was an Aria Pro 2, and it was a copy of a fretless Fender Precision with a maple fingerboard. Beautiful instrument. I wish I'd have kept it, to be honest. But I bought that in, I think, 1979, and that cost me 250 quid. In 1979.
What's that now? It's crazy.
Basses are cheaper now than they were back then, sort of thing. But no, I think what it is, it's less to do. The appeal of getting something for free is definitely there, but I think it's like a kudos thing. So in other words, people know that if you get an endorsement, it's not just about being given something for free. It's about the company using you in an advert, mentioning your name. You might get a picture of you at the NAMM show or something like that. So people are aware of that as well. It's the exposure, I guess, and it's almost become a badge of honor. Getting an endorsement, it's become this big badge of honor. Like, I've got an endorsement. I've made it. And the trouble is, of course, that some companies just give out stuff for free willy-nilly to whoever asks for it, and they're not very selective. And I think that's a real problem, because what happens is it dilutes everything. It just means that there are certain players that are, not doing high-profile work, and there's nothing wrong with that. I've done lots of stuff that isn't high profile, but if you're just sort of giving someone anything and everything, and they're not being seen with it, what's the point of that? Because you give something so that person is going to give you exposure, and also what it means is if you're giving stuff away for free, and the people that are receiving it don't really care about the quality of this, or they're not in love with it, but because they've been given it for free, they're going to kind of give it exposure. And that's a really false economy to me. I mean, I have been offered a lot of different free things over the years, and I've said no to the majority of them because I don't believe in it. It's not what I want. I know it's not going to sort of suit me. So I've turned around loads of times and said, no, thanks. Or I've sent stuff back. And, you've got to have some integrity at some point in your life, because the thing is, I just want to be, because I don't want to be sort of seen playing something or using something and representing a company that I know there's something not good here. It's kind of faulty or isn't saying right, because then people are going to question me and my integrity and my choices. They're going to think, hang on, I thought Dave had more
integrity than this. And at the end of the day, why do you want something free if it's kind of crap anyway? Like, it's just going to be
exactly that. But some people do, because it just makes them feel better about themselves. It makes them feel fulfilled, and it makes them feel as though they've accomplished something, and it's a distorted reality, really. It's really about the craft, and for me, that's what it's always about. All I ever want to do on a daily basis is to be a better musician. I mean, I actually took up the guitar last year. It was one of my lockdown projects, because I'd always struggled with playing the guitar before, because I'd never had enough time to dedicate to it. And because I don't play a chordal instrument, I mean, I understand the keyboard, I can play chords, but I'm not a piano player. So all my instruments have predominantly been monophonic, trombone and basses. So I'd wanted to play the guitar for ages. So I took up the guitar last year, and I've been doing lots of practice. And hopefully, me and my wife Lucy, we could maybe do some jazz duo gigs.
Yeah,
because you can't do like jazz duo gigs with voice and double bass for 2 hours.
People do it, but I don't get it. Like, honestly, I have kind of funny opinions on that. I've seen like these videos where these guys are doing these amazing arrangements. They're playing the bass and they're tapping it, and I'm like, that's really awesome. But a lad playing 3 chords on the guitar would be better at accompanying.
Sure. So yeah, I thought to myself, that was the idea. I thought we can do some nice little low key jazz gigs, but it would be nice playing a chordal instrument. And that's the other thing I say to a lot of bass players and my students in particular. I sort of say it's really good to have some knowledge of a chordal instrument. It will enhance your bass playing so much. I mean, particularly on the piano, because visually, it's a very good representation. It's a lot easier to understand harmony on the piano. But even if you don't learn to play it, just the study of harmony on there will be a big help. Because actually, when I moved to London, I could read music and I could play all different styles, but my knowledge of harmony wasn't very good at all. So one of the first things I did when I got here to London was study harmony privately. I didn't go to college or uni or anything like that, but I had private lessons with people studying that, because that was a big missing piece of my education. But it does help if you're also playing an instrument where you can play and hear chords.
Yeah, definitely. For your ear, like to hear them stacked on top of each other.
Yeah,
it's much
absolutely.
better.
I mean, I in the early 90s, there was an amazing American jazz bass player called Michael Moore. And Michael's still around. In fact, I'm trying to reconnect with him. his last gig was playing with Dave Brubeck in his band. So Michael Moore is he's jazz royalty. He's right up there. I think he's retired from playing now, but this was in the early 90s, and he was living in London temporarily, and I went to study with him, for some technique lessons, but also improvisation stuff, because he was one of the most lyrical double bass players. Played with a bow. He got me to switch from French to German bow as well, which was a great decision. It felt more natural to me.
It's a different way of holding it, is it? You hold one kind of over and one under. Is that it?
Exactly, yeah. And for me, I'd never played with the German bow before, and all of a sudden, because that's what he used, and he gave it to me, and I just thought to myself, this feels so much better to me. I mean, some people say that if you have long arms, the German bow is easier to use. If you've got short arms, it's a French one. I don't know if that's legit, but it felt better to me. So that was a big thing to begin with. But one of the first things he said to me when we started studying with him, I said, I want to learn more about harmony, improvisation, soloing. And he said, do you play the piano? And I said, no. He said, right, let's start learning the piano then. Because he could already play. He was quite a nice jazz pianist. And he had a piano. And I said, listen, I know the notes and I know some chords. I said, but he said, well, that's fine. He said, I'm going to show you. So really, I went to him for the bass and that stuff. And the first thing he did was, right, let's go straight to the piano. So he gave me some piano lessons. We talked about chords and harmonies and what have you. And then sometimes I'd play the piano and he's playing the double bass next to me in his music room, and then we'd swap around. But it was that when I realized the importance of at least doing some study on a chordal instrument, even if you don't want to become a piano player or a full-time guitarist. It's amazing what you can learn and what you can then use on the bass afterwards, whether it's, because straight away with guitar you are dealing with chords. You have to know all of those chords in those shapes, all the notes rather. But also as a guitarist, you're playing melodies straight away. Whereas when I used to get sort of bass books, it was like the first bass line would be dun 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 dun, which wasn't very musical or inspiring, even though I've had to play that a lot over the years. But what I'm saying is the nature of the piano or the guitar, straight away you're understanding and playing chords, you're playing melodies. So I kind of think it's really useful, and for brass players as well, the same thing. And I think if you go to music college, I think you're expected to play the piano.
It's mandatory in all colleges, I think.
Sure. So that's definitely something that I wish I'd done it sooner. I wish I'd had piano lessons when I was younger. But yeah, I'm really enjoying playing the guitar now. So we'll see how it goes.
That's your next gig in London. Well, a few months, give you a chance to practice.
Exactly.
So we should definitely talk about how the Jools Holland band came about. Is there a story about it, or was it just an audition was posted? Because am I right in saying Pino Padalino was the bass player in the band, and then he was leaving?
Yeah. So what happened is that, well, when Pino came to London, probably way before I did. I think I came here '88. He was already here. So I think Pino's very first gig was with Jools, because the Jools had a band called Jools Holland and his Millionaires. So Pino was definitely Jools' bass player. But then what happened is when I came to London, I didn't know anybody at all. I may have known one or two people, but because I'd had a good living as a session musician and a working musician for like 8-9 years, but I wanted to do something more creative. I wanted to study with people. Again, I wanted to study because I didn't take music at school as an academic subject. My knowledge of music came through playing the trombone. So for me, I wanted to come to London to be a better musician, to study and to play with creative musicians, to play creative music. I didn't just want to be stuck in a studio. I didn't just want to have a piece of paper put in front of me. So I came to London and I really wanted to play jazz. And I said to myself, I just want to play double bass. I didn't particularly want to play bass guitar. I had it with me. And that's what I was doing. I was doing lots of jazz gigs on the double bass. Now, one of the saxophone players that I was working with, a friend of mine called Phil Veacock, he'd already got the gig with Jools, because Jools he'd been with Squeeze and then he'd left Squeeze and he kept going backwards and forwards. But this was the final time now. He was done and he wanted to be a solo artist. So at this stage, he had been using Pino a lot, but he'd also been using a guy called Keith Wilkinson, who was the bass player with Squeeze at the time. So he was at the end of it, before I got there, he was flipping between the two guys. But anyway, so Pino had gone off with, I guess, Paul Young or Gary Newman, whoever, and he was starting on his journey
ascension
upwards.
into the stratosphere.
Ascension is the word, exactly. And then Squeeze reformed. So Keith and the drummer went back with Squeeze because they thought that was a safer bet. Because Jools was starting out from scratch as a solo artist, and people only knew him from the keyboard player with Squeeze and on the tube. People didn't know him as a. And bearing in mind, this is before the TV, before the radio, before everything. So he was then looking for a bass player. He mentioned it to, and the band was smaller at the time. It wasn't the size of his name. It was only a 9-piece band. It was 5 rhythm section and 4 horns. So what the sax player, Phil, we're doing a jazz gig one day, and he said, "Oh, Jools is looking for a bass player. You know, would you be interested?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I guess. But I was kind of happy doing what I was doing. Suffering from my art. I was doing great jazz gigs with great jazz musicians, but I wasn't earning a lot of money."
You were really a jazz musician.
Oh yeah, my goodness. And but then, so what happened is I was contacted and I was told to go to an audition, so this was at Jools' private studio, which is in Greenwich, which is just down the road from me. It's literally, well, it's 5 minutes from where I live now. At the time, I lived a little bit further away, so it's probably 20 minutes away, but still fairly local. So I went to the studio with my double bass. Jools was there with our guitarist, who's still with us. And I just remember being very nonchalant about the whole thing, because I guess, if you audition for the Jools gig now, and he doesn't really do auditions. In fact, I'm the only person that auditioned for that gig. Everybody else got the gig. Somebody recommended them, and Jools went, "Okay, come and do a gig and let's hear you." But I think for him, because he'd had Pino and he knew how good Pino was, and he knew what modern day bass players are capable of doing, he didn't want to take a chance on just hiring me, saying, "Yeah, come and do the gig," and then realizing on the bandstand that this isn't happening, But also the reason why he was interested in me was because he predominantly wanted a double bass player. Pino only played bass guitar. So this time Jools wanted someone who played upright. So anyway, but I was kind of quite casual because I was happy with what I was doing elsewhere. And Jools didn't have the TV or the radio show. So it wasn't like you're entering into the situation where you think, if I get this, then I'm going to be on the TV. And I'm going to do this, that.
That kind of puts it in context for people listening, because I knew that Jools was in Squeeze, and I knew that he was the keyboard player in Squeeze, and that was way before. But I didn't know that he hadn't started becoming an artist as much on his own right before you joined the band. So that's
right.
So lucky to get in at the time, but that's just serendipity, I suppose they call it, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And also, I think it was good because I got, that was 91. Okay. Well, I'll finish the story, but I'll come on to this. But I was very nonchalant. I mean, not to the point where I didn't care, but I wasn't I didn't feel under pressure because I didn't even know what Jools was doing. I didn't know what gigs he had. I just knew him from the past. I didn't know anything about his present. So we just played, me, him, and the guitarist. We just jammed for an hour. I can't remember what. And then at the end of it, Jools said that was really great, fantastic player, really, really loved what you did. But then he said to me, we do have other people to see. And I remember thinking at the time, well, that sounds a bit of a brush off.
It does, in fairness.
It sounds like I was getting the elbow going. And I thought to myself, do you know what? I didn't mind at all because I knew I would go back to doing my jazz gigs and playing with these great musicians and being very creative and whatever. It didn't affect me. So I'm putting the bass away, and Jools and the guitarist went outside for a chat. And they came back 5 minutes later, and Jools went, "Oh, to hell with it. The gig's yours. You've got the gig." And he gave me like a carrier bag full of cassette tapes of gigs that he'd done with Pino and a couple of recordings. And he said, "Just go and have a listen to those. and get a feel of them, and we'll be in touch. And that was it. I got the gig there and then on the spot. But the thing is, as I said, this was 1991. So we ended up just doing some gigs, some universities, some college balls, a few medium-sized venues, and it was all very low key. And I'm thinking, yeah, this is really pleasant, and I was still then able to do all the other things I was doing. And I thought, yeah, why not? And then the following year, 1992, is when he got the TV series later with Jools Holland. And then the year later, 93, he got the Hootenanny, the New Year's Eve TV show.
Which are institutions now, like those shows, like.
Exactly that. It's been going all that time. We've never missed one. But so all of a sudden, I'd gone from being a jazz musician, playing in little sort of bars and clubs, whatever, to playing in slightly bigger bars and clubs with Jools. And all of a sudden, you're on TV. You're getting these phone calls saying, we need you to come and play with Eric Clapton. We need you to come and play with B.B. King. And I'm thinking, this is the weirdest thing I've ever known, because I just didn't see, and none of us did. None of us knew that this was going to happen. We were just thrust into this situation. And it's like, it's sink or swim. What do? You say, okay, fair enough. And the funniest thing is, I look back on those very early TV clips, and I still had some hair, not much. I really should have shaved my head sooner, because it looks pretty bad. But it's just the way I'm dressed, because I'd never been on TV before. No one had told me what to wear. I didn't have a girlfriend at the time. And I'm so scruffy. I'm wearing sort of the raggedy old T-shirts and really bad colors and raggedy old jeans. I look as though I've just been doing the gardening.
Yeah.
Or I've just been under a car fixing an oil leak, But I wasn't thinking of that. What I was thinking of is, I'm playing with these iconic and legendary artists. I've got to do this well. So I was thinking about the music, about the instruments, getting into that. I wasn't thinking about, how good do I look? Yeah, wearing this, So it does embarrass me looking back on my wardrobe in those early shots. But what I'm not embarrassed about is the performances, because and it made everyone raise our game. I've learned so much from all of that TV work. And not long after that, Jools got his own radio show, BBC Radio 2 show, which, that stopped a couple of years ago, but it went on for quite some time. And it's the same thing. We were playing with the same kind of artists on there: Adele, Amy Winehouse, all of these people. So yeah, we like I said, it lifted us all up. Our own sort of playing all improved, and our ears improved, and it was an amazing thing. But it really was completely unexpected. It just came out of the blue. But as you said, it's sometimes I think a lot of people say to me, Dave, you're so lucky. You're really lucky. They keep using this word, and I think to myself, it's the wrong word to use, really. I prefer fortunate, because luck, the word luck, it implies there's no effort.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Made. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I'd be lucky. I don't do the lottery, but let's just say if I had a ticket here now and I just went blah, 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 and I went down to my local shop and put it, and I won 10 million quid. Now that's lucky, because little or no thought has gone into that, But the fact is, before the Jools gig, I had been playing for almost 10 years, doing all manner of gigs, some good, some terrible, so I wasn't, I didn't get this on a silver platter straight away. I've been playing for a long time, and obviously I'd made the effort to come to London. I knew to further my career, or just to have a better life, I knew that I had to come to London. So, there was a lot of decision making there. There was a lot of sacrifices made. There was a lot of time where some of my other mates were in the pub or having a laugh or going to parties, and I'd be at home transcribing or working stuff out. So all of this stuff, sort of all came together. And it's like one of my favorite quotes is like there's a variation on it. I think the original quote was, the harder you practice, the luckier you get. But some people say the harder you work, the luckier you get. And I think that's it. You've just got to be doing stuff. You've got to be actively doing things, whether it's out there working, seeking work, studying, learning, because you just don't know what's going to come from whatever. I mean, when I came to London, I could have easily ended up living in East London, Northeast, South, whatever. But because I was predominantly living in Southeast London, which is where Jools was born, and that's where studio was, and that's where most of the guys in the band were. That's something else that was quite lucky, I guess. You know, because that is a bit random.
Yeah, that was lucky, but the rest, the 10,000 hours you spent practicing before the audition wasn't luck.
Oh yeah. So, you know, if I'd have gone into that audition with Jools that day and I'd have played terribly and out of tune and out of time and bad feel, whatever, that would have been the end of that. You know, the only thing that carried me through was everything I'd learned the previous 10 years. So that was that 91, and still here.
I love your YouTube channel. I'm going to post it in the description when I put this up. It's like a time capsule of everything you've done. Like, it's really cool. Like, you have all those performances on it. Like,
I mean, sadly, there's lots of stuff that isn't on there. I mean, some of the stuff has been taken down because of copyright. You know, but there's a lot of stuff. I tried to record everything as time went on because you know, I just like archiving things. But I didn't get everything. There's some of the early stuff that I didn't get. And of course, we did that TV show in the mid-90s with Chris Evans, which was called Don't Forget Your Toothbrush. And that was an interesting, because that was like a wacky game show. And we were the house band on there, but we were still playing with some amazing artists. I mean, the first time I got to play with Chaka Khan was on that show, playing I'm Every Woman, Ain't Nobody.
Serious bass lines in those tunes as well.
Yeah. Well, that was the other funny thing with that, because Jools really didn't want me to play bass guitar. He loved my double bass playing, and that's all he wanted me to use. Now, for Jools's music and for what we were doing prior to that point, the double bass was perfect. So we started to do this Don't Forget Your Toothbrush, and I remember we played with Cher, a few other people, and I was playing upright, and it was all good. And then we got the call to play with Chaka Khan, and I was listening to, and I'm a huge fan of hers, I always have been. And I was listening to the bass lines to I'm Every Woman, Ain't Nobody. And I think Ain't Nobody it's not even a bass, I think it's a keyboard. And the version that we got of I'm Every Woman wasn't the album version, it was a remix, which is also playing the keyboard. And I'm thinking to myself, there's no way I'm playing that on double bass. No. There's no way. I mean, apart from the fact it would be borderline impossible, it just wouldn't have sounded good. It would have been really lumpy. And I said to Jools, I said, listen, man, please let me switch for once. And I think he thought I was going to go crazy and start to do all this stuff, you know. So I got the bass guitar, transcribed all the parts. I think I used an octave pedal to make it sound a bit more synth-like. And I think then Jools realized the importance of letting me switch. And it's become like crucial now. I mean, I wouldn't be able to do his TV shows if I didn't play both.
You play kind of a hybrid bass, don't you? Sometimes it's kind of it's electric, it's acoustic electric kind of thing. I don't know what.
What happened there is because the first couple of years of touring with Jools, I used just a double bass for the first 3, and it was a nightmare because trying to amplify an acoustic double bass, as most bass players will know, it's fine doing it in a quiet environment in a small venue, but we were doing massive venues. And I had to play at a very high volume, and it was feeding back and it was going crazy. And I struggled with this for years. And I was using all sorts of different pickups and feedback suppressors and graphic EQs. I had this rack system that was like this big. And I'm thinking, I'm playing this instrument that was made in the 30s, and I'm having to put it through all of this stuff to try and stop it from doing what it's supposed to do, which is resonate. So in the end, I said to Jools, I can't do this anymore. This is killing me. It's too much stress. So I also said, how about this? I'll use my double bass, and I've got a different one now. I've got one that was specially made for me. But back then I said, let me use my double bass in more controlled environments, like in the recording studio where it's all quiet and I can have a microphone there, or on TV where we're playing in a small unit, maybe just 2, 3, or 4 of us. I said, but on the tours and on the Hootenanny show where it's, again, big room and it's very loud, I said, are you okay if I use like a stick bass, electric upright bass? And he sort of said, well, as long as it doesn't sound like a fretless bass guitar, he said, yes. He said, as long as you can convince me that this instrument can sound as close to an amplified double bass, because even when I was playing the double bass, it still had to be amplified. Okay, so yeah, so that's what I mean. I used a couple of others, but right now I use the Yamaha one, and straight away I changed the strings to my preferred brand, and I put it through like a particular preamp and a DI thing so I can tweak it. And to me, it's the closest that I can get an instrument of that kind, because it's not really acoustic instrument. It's mostly solid bodied, this EUB, but it's the closest that I can get it to an amplified double bass. And but the main thing is that Jools was happy.
Yeah, and it does sound like one. He has to be happy.
Well,
anyway.
yeah, I mean, it's pretty darn close. I mean, and he wasn't too worried about the visual aspect of it, but yeah, for me, it's about the practicality of it, you know. So, and also an electric upright bass is a lot more consistent. If you play all over the fingerboard, it's you know, there's no peaks and troughs in the notes kind of thing. But if you're playing an acoustic instrument, certain notes will pop out and other notes will disappear, which is a bit of a nightmare, you know. But you know, if I'm like I said, in a more controlled environment, or if I'm doing small jazz gigs, then I'd much rather use my acoustic double bass, you know, without question. But those EUBs are very, very useful, as long as you you know, the thing is, there's a lot of cheap ones out there and they sound what they cost.
Yeah, unfortunately, electric guitars aren't like that. You buy a cheap one, it sounds good, but
yeah, exactly. And also, you're absolutely right. And it's the same with bass guitars. And even to some extent, acoustic double basses. You don't have to spend a lot of money on any of those instruments to get a half decent one. But ironically, with an electric upright bass, the only way that you will get a really superior one of those is to spend a ton of money. It's the only exception. You know, I mean, the ones I use, they're over $3,000. They're $3,500. But
it's quite similar to electric drum kits. The cheap ones sound horrendous, but the high end ones are actually decently.
Sure. And the trouble is, I think people are scared to buy a double bass because it's a big investment. You know, because you need a great luthier. They need a lot of upkeep. So a lot of people will use an EUB as a stepping stone. But of course, they don't always want to spend a lot of money on this. But you know, if you're going to spend 500 quid on an electric upright bass, it's not going to be nice. It's not going to be good. I mean, it's going to be okay maybe to transition, but to actually use it on a gig, and you're wanting that to sound like an amplified double bass, you're going to be very disappointed, really. So, but yeah, I'm a big fan of those instruments, and I've got a couple of old vintage Ampeg baby basses as well from the 60s, which are really nice. But yeah, it's become a necessity, especially for travel as well. And also I do some freelance gigs where I'm in London. I jump on and off the tube trains, and the Yamaha, because it packs up and it's not much longer than a bass guitar. So it's like, when I first came to London, I was taking my double bass and an amp on the tube trains.
Oh God, I've been on them tubes. They're not big at all.
Oh yeah, I'm not doing that again.
I actually had another double bass player on this, Katie Theroux, American, and she never brings her double bass on tour. She just has to get given one every festival she plays all over Europe, and sometimes they can be absolutely terrible. Sometimes they can be cool, but it's just a roll of the dice, like. Yeah,
I mean, I've done that before. I've used rented basses, and yeah, you're absolutely right, because they're very, to me, they're a lot more personal than bass guitars. You know, there's a lot more. You know, the action, the string action, the type of strings they are, because obviously you've got metal strings, you've got gut strings, and synthetic strings. I prefer to play gut and synthetic. I used to play metal strings. I'm not a fan of them now, but more often than not, they will be metal strings, and the action will be off, and the way the bass is set up. So yeah, you can get very unlucky, I think, when you're using so in that instance, I'd almost rather take my own electric upright bass, because I know how that sounds and how it works and stuff, and I'd much rather make that compromise if I need to. So.
And is it ever weird when you're backing up a bass player on Jools Holland? Because I saw that you played with Paul McCartney and Sting, and was that a strange experience, thinking, what will he think of my bass playing? Considering, and they're both probably idols of yours as well, like.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've great admiration for them both. But the key thing is, first of all, in my experience, I've played with Sting a few times. I played with Paul McCartney a few times, and on all the occasions they've been so nice. They've been really fun, kind, considerate sort of people, and that's a great start for me. If you're a decent human being, I'm much more impressed if you're a decent human being than I am about your musicality. And so yeah, with Sting, he did the very first Hootenanny, the very first one in '93. And so yeah, he was playing bass guitar, and I think his album at the time, which is my favorite Sting album, is 10 Sumner's Tales. And so I thought to myself, okay, so yeah, he's on bass, so I'm not needed here, so I'll just go and have a sit. And I was playing double bass, and I'm just have a sit down. And he saw me walking away, and he came over. He said, no. He said, where you going? Where you going? I said, well, you're gonna. He said, no. He said, I want us both to play. He said, I want us both to do it. And we did Walking on the Moon, the Police song, and he wanted to do one of the tracks from his album, which I think was called Still Know Nothing About Me, which is on YouTube. And he said, look, yeah, I'm going to be playing bass guitar on both of them. He said, but the fact you're playing acoustic bass, and bearing in mind he plays double bass as well, he's a big fan of the instrument. He said, let's just play together. Why not? Why shouldn't we have two bass players? He said, I want you to stay and I want you to enjoy it. So I thought that was really sweet of him.
That's
because
cool, yeah.
Because otherwise I'd have had to go and sit in the corner, and everyone else would have got to play with Sting, and I'd be there kind of. Oh,
you could say I got to watch Sting once from the side of the stage.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, it reminded me of a story when I was doing this Mingus piece for the Bass Player magazine. It reminded me of a story when we supported Sting. The Jools Holland band supported Sting on a European tour in the early '90s. And back then, I used to do a big double bass solo. I literally was brought to the front of the stage, or I walked to the front of the stage, and it was an open solo, like nobody else was playing, and I could just play anything I wanted to, you know. So I started off like just playing very freely. There was no time or anything like that. Playing very free, whatever I wanted to do, and then I would start the riff to the following song, and the band would join in. But you know, I got to be as flamboyant as I wanted to be. Now, after that particularly one gig, I'm coming off stage, and Sting had been there watching the whole thing. And he came up to me, he gave me a big hug, and he said, Dave, it's like, I love your playing, I loved your solo. He said, man, you remind me of Charles Mingus. And I thought to myself, wow, you know, I mean, I was happy with just the hug. I'd have been done there. But you know, he said, you know, I love your playing, I love the solo you did. But yeah, when he said, you remind me of, and because the thing is, Mingus for me is a big influence. He hasn't influenced a lot of bass players. He's influenced a lot of composers. Yeah. But not many, because he's very hard to quantify, Charles Mingus, because he was such a free player, and he had virtuosic technique. But he's not as easy to study as, say, Ray Brown or Ron Carter. You know, he's very hard to quantify, but I was definitely channeling him, and it was nice that Sting noticed that. So yeah, so Sting was very happy for me to play bass. Now, when the first time I met Paul McCartney was in the recording studio, and he was playing mandolin, so I had to play bass. So that was fine. But then he did the Hootenanny TV show, and he did a duet with Kylie, and he was playing mandolin on that. So I was definitely needed on upright. But then he wanted to do Got to Get You Into My Life, but he wanted to play bass guitar on that. So again, I thought to myself, okay, I'm not needed here. So I went again, same as the thing with Sting. I went to walk away, and Paul said, no, where are you going? And I said, well, he said, no, I want you to play as well. He said, and I need you to play. I need you to be there. I said, what do you mean? I said, because we're both going to be playing the same thing. He said, yeah, there's always one bit of this song, and I'm never quite sure where it is in the song. He said, I always get a little bit confused. So he said, so I'm going to look at you for the cue, so you can tell me where. And I said, okay. No pressure. I thought, I was a little surprised, considering they wrote it, sort of thing. But anyway, sure enough, we did the song, and we he's playing, I'm playing upright. And the video is out there. It's on YouTube, and you can see the moment. It's towards the end of the song, and we're all playing. And he turns round to look at me, and I give him the nod. And I think he does this. I think he like a tip of the hat or something like that. Or he puts his thumb up, and then he goes back to playing. But it's so funny how that moment is captured.
That's class.
got to get into my life, you know. So, but yeah, so he was. I mean, both of them were lovely and charming. Now, interestingly, I have played with other bass players, but these were on Jools's radio show. So what's happened here is, and these people they wanted to play bass just them. Okay, so we Jack Bruce came on there many years ago. He played bass. We had Tony Visconti came on there, who predominantly is a bass player, but he's obviously best known as a producer. We had I think Sheryl Crow. We had Susie Quattro, Mike Rutherford. So all these people were guests on Jools' show, but they all wanted to play bass. So I just said, and we had like a little horn section. We had 2 saxophone horn section and the rhythm section. So I just said to Jools, I said, "Look, are you okay if I play trombone in the horn section?"
Yeah,
you know?
Class.
And he said, "Yeah, sure." You know, so with all of those latter bass players, I got to play trombone with them.
So you can still tick the box. I played with
yeah.
Susie
So exactly. So I can still say that, you know. So, and that's the reason why I was very glad that I kept up my trombone chops, even though I don't play it that much these days. But that was kind of fun, and I've got some nice pictures in the studio of me actually. So yeah, it's quite perverse how that worked out, you know. So,
I think it's great the way you archive your. Like, I even regret my own career not getting more pictures with certain people I met, and that I think it's really cool because your Instagram, you put up lots of pictures. That's great that you consciously archive all this stuff, because it's so fun to look back at, and instead of just saying, "Oh, I wish I had that picture from that gig or that time I met this person."
Sure. Well, I mean, I didn't do it like I said at the very beginning. You know, with the later stuff. The only reason why I've got anything is because it was shown on TV and I recorded it. But having pictures taken, I didn't used to do that in the very early days. So there was lots of missed opportunities. But then I was also very aware of the fact that you've got to be really careful when you're working with these artists that you don't overstep the mark, because, you know, you need to be personable with them. You know, you need to be sort of nice and pleasant, but, you know, you can't be too chummy with them. You can't sort of go up to them and, you know, BB King and sort of start patting him on the back saying, "BB, my man, how's it going?" You know, there's certain things, there's certain sort of limits and that. So I think early on when I was younger, because I was in my 20s when I got the Jools gig. I think when I was younger, I didn't do that because I thought to myself, you know, maybe it's not the right thing to do, and I wasn't confident enough to do it. I'm sure a lot of them would have been fine, and this was because before smartphones as well, so it would have had to have been a camera. But I think, you know, I just didn't have the confidence to do it. And then as time went on, and because, you know, my dad passed away. In fact, not wanting to get too deeply into it, but he actually passed away on today, on this day, back in 93. Back in 1993. Now, bearing in mind that my dad, the Jools TV show had only just started then, so I don't think my dad ever saw me on TV, and he never came to a Jools gig because he passed away quite suddenly. So I think the thing is because I always regret that. I always regret that he never saw, you know, he saw the first 10 years, but he didn't see the others after that, you know, and I was always kind of a little bit sort of, you know, I always thought it was a great shame stuff. So I kind of thought to myself, I still had my mum up until a couple of years ago. So I think I started to archive stuff for her because she wasn't able to come and see me play, and she couldn't stay up late enough to watch the TV. So I think I did it as much for her. You know, I wanted to be able to sort of go to my mum and say, "Mum, this is what I've been up to. This is what I've been doing," because I never got to do that with my dad. So I think that's where that came up. But of course, I only met my partner, who's now my wife, Lucy. I only met her 6 years ago, and our son Oscar is now 4. So it's fantastic that I've got this stuff for him now. It's taken on, this archiving of stuff has taken on a whole new thing, because it's just nice, I guess. Well, hopefully he'll be proud of what I've done.
Yeah, when he's old enough to appreciate who Sir Paul McCartney is, I think he'll be impressed. Like, yeah,
maybe he'll be watching it, kind of going, "Oh." But,
I know you, because Paul McCartney did a single with Kanye West, so he's, you know.
There's hope.
There's a modern connection there.
Exactly. But it's and also for me as well, the reason, and I do post quite a lot, and it's certainly not an ego thing. It's certainly not ego based. But I think another reason why I am quite active on social media posting stuff is because I do, one of the most lucrative things about the Jools gig are the endorsements that I have. I've been with Ibanez for a number of years now, and I use other instruments. I still got older instruments, vintage instruments, but I predominantly use their basses. And it's same with other companies with various strings, whatever. And the thing is that for me, I post stuff and I try and mention the gear on there, and because what I'm doing is I'm saying thank you. This is me showing my support to the companies, and I'm saying, well, thank you for your support. Because Ibanez in particular, they put my image up. I think it was about 30 feet high at the last NAMM show that happened.
How cool is that? Like,
yeah, well, I thought, well, either cool or it's very terrifying. I don't know. I think it may have scared some people off seeing my face that high, but that never happened before. I'd never experienced that. So they like I said, they're very supportive, as the other companies are. So for me, when I do the social media thing, it's as much for me to say, look, here's me using this. I use this gear because. So it's as much as that. It's as much as me saying thank you to all the companies for their support and what have you. But yeah, I guess it'll be kind of fun for me when I'm even older than I am now. I guess it's kind of been nice to look back on, but. Yeah,
I like it anyway. I like seeing the picture. I love seeing all those pictures. I never thought it was you were just showboating, right? And it was nice to see the pictures.
Oh, that's good. I'm sure some people do think that's what it is, but no, it's just kind of and I'll be honest, and the truth of it is, I think if people do think it's any form of showboating, you have to ask the question: if it was them, if they had my gig, if anybody had my gig, what would you then do?
Exactly.
If you had all this video footage of you playing with these iconic and legendary people, or photographs, would you just keep them to yourself?
No, you're going to be posting.
So, but yeah, I think I'm kind of lucky in the fact that because Jools does have a TV show and he did have a radio show, so I was in a very unique position. So obviously, some of my mates have great gigs. They're playing much higher profile bands than I do. Which is kind of great, but they tend just to be in that one band, which is fantastic. That's really brilliant. The unique thing about the Jools gig is, it's one band, but because of the TV show, we get to play with, so many more people that you would never get to do in any other circumstance. I mean, people used to compare this gig of mine to Will Lee on the David Letterman show. Because obviously he was in the house band there and they had to play with a number of artists that came on. I guess the biggest difference is that the Letterman show was a chat show with some music, whereas Jools Holland's is a music show with some chat. I guess that's the slight difference.
So more opportunity.
But people often used to compare the same thing, But yeah, I mean, sure, if I didn't have the Jools gig, I wouldn't have played with all of those artists. It would have been impossible. There wouldn't have been any other circumstance where that could have happened.
No, it's once in a lifetime kind of gig where that happens, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's really unique, and I'm really pleased to have it, and I hope it'll keep going. I don't know how. I guess as long as
it's very popular on this side of the sea anyway, so I'm sure it'll keep going.
As long as
people in Ireland watch the Hootenanny for New Year's instead of watching the national broadcaster.
Oh, is that right?
So that's a good sign.
Sure. Well, I guess as Jools still loves playing. I mean, even with all of his accomplishments and accolades, the bottom line is he loves playing. So we've already just had our tour dates for this year. We've already had the rehearsal dates for the Hootenanny. So it looks as though things are going to carry on as they are. But, for me, also working with my wife now, because when Lucy and I met, she wasn't a professional singer. She only became professional a couple of years ago. So actually, I'm doing lots of gigs with her. She's booking me. She's my other boss. So, and that's fantastic because that really fulfills my jazz needs, which again is why I came to London in the first place, because I wanted to play jazz with jazz musicians. So we get to do that quite a lot together. So so she thankfully she books me whenever she can. I can't always do the gigs, so she has to get other bass players. But more if I'm free, luckily I'm her first call bass player. Which
cool. You should try come over here for the Jazz Fest if you can in October. The Cork Jazz. Sure. There's so many. Jools does it, doesn't he? Sometimes
we have done it in the past, But absolutely, because she's gaining a reputation, and she's already worked with some amazing UK jazz musicians. I mean, real kind of jazz royalty, people like Dave O'Higgins and Graham Harvey. And I think even she was a little surprised when she was able to get these musicians to work with her, because she's only really just started out. And I said to her, never underestimate what offering a musician money can achieve, my sweet.
It's a great lubricator. You don't want drink only when you're like 19, 17 even. After that, it's money or that's
exactly. Well, as the saying goes, a gig's a gig.
Yeah.
It's exactly. we all need to work. So I said, and it's I'm really pleased for her. But I'm pleased for us both, because like I said, it's almost like a second career I've got now on the side. So, and
also it's brilliant. You get to do the thing together instead of you being gone for the night or the weekend. That's pretty big plus. Like,
so luckily we've got Grandma who can look after our son Oscar. But I love doing it, because I think for me, jazz is closest to my heart, like music-wise. If you look at the majority of my music collection, it is jazz. I think that's what I started out listening to. And it's the music that excites me the most. It's also the music that's the most challenging, because not only technically, the technique you need to have on your instrument, that kind of facility, but also the harmonic complexity of the music. You really need to know your stuff to be able to play jazz effectively. Don't get me wrong, I'm still happy to do rock stuff or funk or pop or whatever, but really, jazz for me is the one thing that I'm most passionate about. It's what I love listening to. It's what excites me the most, and it's certainly what I love playing more than anything else. And the Jools gig, it's not a jazz gig as such. It is called Jools Holland and his Rhythm and Blues Orchestra, and on tour, majority of songs are kind of R&B, soul, blues type thing. But to me, that's still closer to the jazz world than if I was in a death thrash metal band or whatever.
That's true.
Whatever you call it.
Would you play that if that might happen on Jools? Some death metal band will be on and they'll need you.
Well, do you know what? I guess the closest I've come to doing anything remotely like that was I did play with Lemmy.
Oh, class!
We played with Lemmy, and again, that's on YouTube, and he was a guest on that Chris Evans show, Don't Forget Your Toothbrush. And he did two songs with us. He did Good Golly Miss Molly, which was obviously much more suited to us, but he wanted to do Ace of Spades, and I thought, well, this is going to be fun. And I got an old Fender Jazz, which I still have. It's a 1978 Olympic white Fender Jazz. That was my main bass back then. And I thought, okay, so we've got Lemmy here. He's got his Rickenbacker. So it's another one of those situations. I thought to myself, okay, I'm going to sit down and I'll sit this one out and I'll leave it to Lemmy. And Jools is looking at me saying, no, come back on the. And I thought, well, why do you need two bass players? Because at that point, I'd never played with one before. So I think Lemmy was playing. Don't get me wrong, he was a great guy, and he was, I love him, loved his playing, all that stuff. Nothing against him at all. But what he was playing was very like a distorted fuzz.
Yeah. He goes through a Marshall stack, like with loads of it doesn't even sound like a bass guitar, really.
Yeah, exactly. So he was like playing chords almost. So the fact is, the one thing that you couldn't hear was like a bass line, like a clean bass line. And I can't even remember what the official line was. But anyway, I listened to the track. So I ended up playing like a clean, what I thought was the bass line on the record, and just let Lemmy do his thing. And it's so weird because like now, all the things I've posted on YouTube, every day when I kind of look into my emails and it sort of says, oh, like someone's commented on YouTube, and I just know it's the Lemmy clip. It says that everyone absolutely loves it. They lost their mind. And I'm just thinking of all the stuff, all the other things I did with Smokey Robinson and Paul Simon and Amy and Adele, but it's the Lemmy clip that everyone comments on and loves, you know. So
he's a complete legend, I guess. Like people,
exactly.
They just want to watch him, you know.
Yeah, I mean, you can just see me in the background, a little tiny bit. Again, I still had some hair, you know, but yeah, it was kind of fun to do. But yeah, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I'm still a gun for hire to some extent. You know, being a session musician, you know, I will just step up to the plate if I can reasonably do it, if there's enough time to learn the songs, whatever. But yeah, I mean, jazz for me, playing double bass, playing in a jazz situation is probably where I'm the happiest, you know.
Did you hear Stanley Clarke's album Rise of Strings with Al Di Meola? It was kind of he was playing electric for years, and then this one he's back on the double bass, and he's doing a bit of bowing and everything. It's really class album.
How old is it, or how recent is it?
It's about 10, 12 years old, but really good.
Okay. I mean, I definitely got all the early stuff of Stanley's, and again, you know, I was really impressed with him because he was one of the few players that played both instruments to a super high level. I mean, these days there's way more guys that can do it, but back then he was, and I love Jacko absolutely, you know, and like I said, Jacko's definitely in my top three, but yeah, with Stanley, the fact that he played both so well, I was just completely, I mean, it annoyed the hell out of me.
Yeah,
you know, because he was me trying to be unique. And that's the other thing as well. When I came to London, it was very easy to get gigs because, first of all, there were a lot less musicians around. I mean, these days, everyone's a musician. It doesn't matter where you go. Everyone's got a guitar or a keyboard, and everyone wants to be a musician. Back then, it really wasn't that the case at all. So I came to London. There was a lot less musicians. There was a lot more work. There was a ton more work. And also there was a small group of bass guitarists and a small group of double bass players that were getting all the session work and all the gigs. But there was even a smaller group of guys that played both, a very, very small group. And I was able to join that, playing both. And I was still playing trombone as well, but really I knew the future was going to be with double bass and bass guitar. So I was able to, that was a huge thing for me. That's what got me so much work early on and got me established very early on. The thing these days is like there's so many guys that they say, yeah, of course I play both. Yeah. Bass guitar, double bass, yeah. And then you've got the next generation that, yeah, I play double bass, I play bass guitar, I play keyboards, I play keyboard bass, I play bass pedals, I do BVs, I'm an MD.
I do it all.
You know, and I'm thinking to myself, man, I now feel completely underqualified. Oh yeah, I just play, you know, trombone, double bass, bass guitar, little bit of guitar, and you know, it's just that everyone does everything now, and I guess, you know, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get the gig or get a gig, but I suppose, you know, it's great to be versatile. It's very, and I think the keyboard thing is definitely more of a pop situation.
Yeah,
I mean, I've never been asked to play keyboard bass in all the stuff. But you know, ironically, I've only ever been asked to play. Well, not even been asked to do it. I've only had to play slap with Jools, I think, twice in 41 years.
And how are your chops as a slap bassist?
Well, do you know what? They're probably very poor right now. But in the 80s, you know, I think I was probably rather quite good at it. You know, because I spent a lot of time doing it. You know, I used to listen to like Marcus Miller a lot and Mark King. I practiced like crazy, and the work I was doing back then, it was expected of me. Everyone wanted and needed bass players to do this. So, but I think what happened is when I came to London and I just thought I want to play more double bass, I want to play jazz, all that stuff. It became less important to me, and I realized as time was going on that and it was starting to become unfashionable as well.
Yeah.
You know, like the late 80s, early 90s. A lot of people really weren't that, it wasn't that big a deal and stuff. And when I got the Jools gig, and personally, he's not a fan of it. He's not a fan of this, right? So I thought to myself, well, if I don't need to do it, why spend why still try and keep the chops up? Because and then what happened is I think we had to play with Barry White's one track, and I listened to the track, and it was a new track of his, and I listened to it, and it sounded to me as though there was some slap on the recording. So I kind of thought, and I hadn't done it for years, so I did a little bit of work, and the song is called "Show Yo Right." And that's also on YouTube. It's on that Chris Evans "Don't Forget Your Toothbrush" show. And you can hear me playing the slap at the beginning of it. But I think that's the only time you'll ever hear me do it, is in that clip. But yeah, and then everyone that we got called for, I think I did it one more time with Boz Scaggs on one song. But everybody else, there was no slap bass. So every time I get a recording and I have to play what's on there or I have to emulate it, I wasn't hearing any slap at all. There was just no one was asking for it, and we're talking about like pop and funk artists as well. And I just thought, well, I thought, and there was much more important things that I wanted to be studying. Like, I wanted to be working on my bowing technique on double bass. I wanted to keep my trombone chops up, studying the guitar, whatever. These things for me were more important than trying to maintain slap chops that I may never use.
Exactly.
And that I've never been called to use apart from those 2 times. So it was about priorities, really, and to be honest with you, the person that I really admire doing it and is Marcus Miller. He's the one that I can really listen to a lot doing that, because I think the way he phrases with it as well, he's almost like phrasing like a vocalist. But other than that, I'm not overly keen on it. If I come across videos on Instagram and the still is the bass player like this, with his thumb ready to go, I don't know, I
skip.
Yeah, generally.
I think the best slap bass lines, especially in the last few years, are just pure simple. Like, you could play them if you couldn't play slap. Often it's just like a pop at the start of a bass line, especially kind of, in the late 90s, a lot of the pop music, they had one little slap in it, but like, I suppose you would call it a slap, but it's not a slap bass line. The rest of the bass line wouldn't have any slap in it. They just throw it in little parts of the song.
Yeah. Well, that's what happened with the Boz Scaggs one. It was on the TV show, and I can't remember what the track was, but it literally was mostly fingerstyle, and every now and again it just had that budu.
Yeah.
But just very, very sparse. It was hardly there, But I just kind of think. And also, I'm surprised, when you see a lot of players on social media and on YouTube and on Instagram, and they're doing this kind of stuff, and I'm thinking to myself, I hope for their sake they're getting gigs playing that kind of thing. I hope it's not just them in their bedrooms for countless hours doing this. I hope they're actually sort of doing gigs and earning some money from it, because otherwise it's, you have to question the motivation there.
Well, funny enough, the last time I played slap bass was when I recorded the intro music to this podcast. So I'm slapping the bass, but I haven't slapped it since, like, about 2 years ago. So,
I mean, the thing is, I would never talk anyone out of. I would never say to people, "Don't even consider it," because the one thing I've always stressed to people is, if you want to be successful in this industry, is to be versatile. You really do need to be as versatile as possible. People love booking guys that they know. We play a couple of instruments, we can read, we can improvise. We've got great ears. I think it's important, and stylistically, it's important. I mean, I love playing with a pick.
Yeah, me too. I really love
that. And I started off with that. I didn't start off with my fingers. It was all pick. And actually, some of my favorite bass players of all time are predominantly known as pick players, and they include Anthony Jackson, Bobby Vega, Carol Kay, Cody Wright, Steve Swallow, who was an amazing, he still is amazing. He was a great jazz double bass player, but he was one of the few guys that switched to bass guitar in the 70s, I think. Left the double bass behind, and he was a fine player. But then he plays bass guitar, and it's predominantly jazz. He plays a lot with John Scofield, and he plays with a pick. So he's playing an electric bass guitar with a plectrum, but he's playing jazz. I mean, it's almost unheard of, but you listen to his sound, and it's beautiful. It's really beautiful. So big fan of Steve Swallow. So yeah, I love hearing the pick in situations that it's not rock thing, because a lot of people just think pick, it's got to be rock, it's got to be metal. All of the guys I've just mentioned, are like jazz, fusion, funk players, and you listen to all of those guys with the pick. I adore it. So for me, and I definitely get called to play with the pick way more in the last 40 years, and I've been called to do this. So I just rather just choose things to work on that I know are going to be more useful. I think if you're younger, it's important to be a bit more open-minded. But then again, I do kind of wonder how many gigs are out there where people want slap bass. I don't know. Maybe there are loads of them.
I don't think there's many, like, to be honest, unless someone wants to email me and tell me about the gig they got doing the slap.
Yeah, I'd love to know. So, but I mean, I guess if it's something that you want to do, then it's kind of great. Again, for me, growing up, turning professional in 81 or something like that, yeah, I had no choice. Absolutely, it was all about slap bass. It was all about it. If you didn't do that, you wouldn't get gigs, or you'd get less gigs. But obviously, the music changed, and my attitude changed, and my wants and needs and stuff. So I'm quite glad to not do that. Now, again, if someone came on Jools' show, and it was definitely that, I would definitely make an effort to do some practice, kind of thing. It's like, because I mean, the thing with a lot of pro players is we may not always be prepared for every single eventuality, but hopefully all of us, or most of us, have that mindset of where, well, I'll fix that. I'll do something about that.
I'll work on that.
I'll work on that, And obviously, if it's just so outright, I mean, if I got asked to like tour with the band and it was like, I don't know, if it was like a level 42 tribute band, and I thought to myself, well, that's you'd be better off picking someone who just does this all the time. But if it was one or two songs on Jools' show, I would then do all the work. I would do all the homework to do that. To play it effectively, but then that would be it, and I probably then wouldn't touch it again for
another few years.
Yeah, exactly that.
On your teaching, I was kind of looking at your website, and you have some interesting stuff on it. You're kind of doing master classes where some people can just kind of watch the master class. You do one-to-one. You do a lot of stuff on the teaching side of things.
It's something that I am quite passionate about, and I think the reason I am is because my education at school, and I'm talking about academic education, was pretty disastrous, really. I'm not quite sure why.
Wasn't your fault. It was the teachers.
Well, yeah. Some people like to blame the school or the establishment, and other people are willing to take full responsibility. And I'm not sure. I'm not sure which it is really. Maybe it's a joint thing. But I just kind of think that when I was at secondary school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was a good athlete. The only time I ever got an A on my school report was in physical education, as it was called then. So I guess in the back of my mind, I was thinking maybe some sportsman. I love basketball. I still do. I'm a big NBA fan. And athletics, I was really good at. So maybe in the back of my mind, I thought that was that. But academically, I hadn't got a clue, So, when you get to a certain age and you choose all your subjects, you get to pick exactly what you want to study. And I made such a mess of that. I made such a mess. Because I was picking subjects so I could be in the class with my friend over there. Yeah. What are you picking? I'll choose that because then we can hang out. And I thought, well, maybe if I pick woodwork and metalwork, so when I'm older, I can put up shelves and do stuff. I'm the worst DIY man you've ever met in your life. My wife is the one that puts up shelves, and puts cupboards together and wires plugged. I'm terrible at that. So that was a complete waste, And also because I didn't know, I wasn't playing any instruments when I chose those subjects, so I didn't pick music. And ironically, all the subjects that I loved were all the arts. They were music, art, drama, literature. They're the things that I was really passionate about, but I didn't think they would get me a job. My parents were factory workers, and even though I didn't think to myself, I want to work in a factory, but because no one in my family had been, had like a sort of job in the arts kind of thing, I didn't know it was possible for that to happen.
Yeah, same.
So
yeah.
Yeah. So I thought to myself, I love all of those things, but how is that going to get me a job? So I didn't pick any of the subjects that I loved. And this was the biggest mistake I could ever make. And this is what I say to people now. You really have to follow your bliss. I think that is actually quite a famous quote. I can't remember who said it. You need to follow your bliss. You need to, whatever it is you love and you're passionate about, assuming it's nothing criminal, like robbing a bank or anything like that. Obviously, then you need to think twice about it. But assuming it's not that, it's important to do that, and almost to the exception of anything else, because I didn't do that. And I was then had all of these academic subjects like physics and RE, and I just thought, I don't like these, and I didn't want to study them. So my whole school education was catastrophic, really. The only saving grace was at the end of it, I decided I wanted to give an instrument another go, and I went to that trombone teacher. And as he just revealed to me a few months ago, he said, I made sure I stuck my neck out. Well, he didn't say those words, but it's what he was inferring that he went the extra length to get the school to take me on, kind of thing. And he changed my life. That day he could have said, forget it. The school has told me you're too old. That's the end of that, and close the door. And who knows what could have happened to me then? My whole life could have changed. But it's that sliding doors thing.
Yeah.
And he took me on, and that was it. But then I embraced music like crazy. But of course, at this stage, I was just on the verge of leaving school. So I didn't have the opportunity to study music academically. It was just purely through an instrument. So I think because of all that, that's why I'm quite passionate about teaching, because I realize the importance of the difference you can make to someone's life, by giving them a certain piece of information, or by tutoring them or mentoring them. I mean, I was lucky that I got that with my trombone teacher so late on. I wish I'd have sort of done it sooner. But that's the reason why, I like to help people, because a lot of mistakes can be made, a lot of bad decisions can be made. There's a lot of misinformation out there as well. And the thing for me is, because I've had 41 years in this industry this year, and the thing is, and I know really a lot of what needs to be studied and learned and stuff like that. So I'm not just sort of a tutor that doesn't do gigs and doesn't do tours and sessions. I've done all of that. There isn't much more I could have done to pass on that experience, kind of thing. So yeah, obviously it's changed quite a bit because of the pandemic. I often used to teach in person as well. So these days it has to be online, and I've got a lot of students in America. But I kind of do miss that in-person thing. I think that's really, really important, and I'd like to do a lot more of it in the future, like different schools and whatever, so I'm all for it. But yeah, it's something that I really enjoy, and it's just nice, to pass on that, and it's real world information as well. It's not just stuff that I've imagined.
And I think you're right about the whole mentor thing as well. Like, you could easily fall into this being the teacher who just shows them whatever. But when you become a mentor, you kind of become invested in that student and really pull them along.
Absolutely, and also a lot of the most relevant advice, and it's not just about the academic side of it or the technique. It is about sort of behavioral, and it's about how you conduct yourself. It's the whole networking thing. It's the do's and don'ts of networking as well. There's a lot of mistakes you can make. There's a lot of pitfalls. I've seen players attempt to network and they've done it all wrong, and they've upset people, and that's the end of it for them. They won't get called again, or certain behavioral things or attitudes. And this is something that you can't always get from just watching videos or just by focusing on the academic side of it. There's a lot of other things there. I mean, when I first auditioned for Jools, because I was very low key, and I think Jools liked that. But perhaps had he have already got his TV show, and I'd have been thinking, wow, if I get this gig, my life is going to change, like beyond recognition. I'm going to be playing with all these famous people. Then I might have been, woo, hi Jools, yeah, come on, let's do this, And he'd have gone, whoa.
Yeah, not sure about this guy.
But it was kind of good. And I don't think I would have done quite that. I might have been a little bit cockier. than I was. But I don't think I'd have gone too crazy, because that's not the kind of person I am. But I think it was even better for me that I got the audition before anything like that happened, because it was so low key that there wasn't much, just I'll just turn up and play, and that's that, So this is a lot of stuff I talk to with students. It's a lot of the other stuff that people don't always think about. The career advice, and believe you me, I've made a lot of mistakes. I've made a lot of mistakes in my career, and I can. Luckily, they are examples that I can use. They're not too shocking that I'm not able to tell.
Any that you want to share with us?
Well, the thing is,
without getting libeled or something.
No. Well, one of the first ones, it's actually quite innocuous, but it's still terribly embarrassing. When I was, and I hadn't even taken up the bass at this point. I was just playing trombone, and I was still at school, I think. So like 16, and I got a call to play in this jazz funk band in Birmingham, not far from my home in Wolverhampton, and they were kind of playing Earth, Wind and Fire type stuff, like original stuff, but it was very that kind of thing. And I loved Earth, Wind and Fire, still do. And they formed a horn section, so they got a sax player, got a trumpet player, needed a trombonist. So they called me up, and I went to their rehearsal room, and they'd probably got a proper manager, they'd got a choreographer. I mean, it was they were doing really well with this band, and I was loving this. I was playing the trombone, playing all these great funk parts, but I was just starting to get into the bass. So I'd be playing the trombone, but I'd be looking behind me, and I'd be watching the bass player as well, doing all this kind of stuff. So I was, taking it all in. And these guys were quite a bit older than me. So I was 16, and they would have been in their like 30s. Mid to late 30s or something like that, or certainly somewhere in their 30s, right? So we got this weekend in France. We got these 2 gigs in a place called Rouen, and I'd never been abroad before, I don't think, or maybe on one school trip. So they picked me up in this van like at 4:00 in the morning. I was still living with my parents, of course, and we went on this trip. Now all these guys had really flamboyant costumes. And I hadn't got anything like that, because they'd been going for years and they'd had all these costumes made. And all I could dig out was a red shirt. And I don't know why I had a red shirt. And my school trousers, my black school trousers. That's it. I didn't have anything else. So it was the most funky I could get. So anyway, we went over there and we did the first show. And we were playing in a nightclub just down the road from the hotel. And we didn't start playing until 1 a.m, something like that. And we did like a long set. So we'd done the sound check and we'd done the first gig, and it was really cool. It was fantastic. And I loved it. I'm thinking, wow, this is amazing. What a fantastic life this is. And then the next day we all went out to walk around this beautiful village. And again, I'd never experienced a lot of the things I was seeing, and we were having all this amazing food and enjoying delicious red wine. Delicious French red wine. What could possibly go wrong? It's like midday or 2:00, whenever it was in the afternoon, and I'm a 16-year-old glugging red wine. What could possibly go wrong? Anyway, we stayed out, loads more drink, loads more food, and then I wasn't falling all over the place, but I must have been fairly intoxicated. So anyway, we went back to the hotel later in the day, and we just agreed. We all said to each other, "Okay, well, we'll see you at the venue," which was was just a few doors away. So I went to my room, and I didn't have a watch at the time, so I just went to my room. This was probably 4:00 in the afternoon or something. My trombone was there, all that stuff, and I just thought, I feel a little bit bit wobbly. So what I'll do is I'll have a sleep, and then sleep for a few hours, and then wake up, shower, all that kind of refreshed, and go to the gig. So I crashed out, and then next thing I know, I woke up in a start. Oh, blimey, what's going on here? So then, it was very dark in this room. So I went downstairs, and the reception area, the guy that owns the hotel, it was completely black outside. And the guy who owns the hotel was asleep on his couch. And I'm thinking, that doesn't sound right to me. What's going on there? So I came outside, pitch black. I ran down to the venue, and the band were just packing up.
Oh, jeez.
They were pulling and the look they gave me, and I was devastated. I was beside myself. And I'm kind of going, what what happened? You know, and they sort of said, you know, we banged on your door. You know, we were kind of going like this, and you didn't respond. So we thought you weren't there, blah, blah. And I thought to myself, hang on a minute. You know, I thought, well, I'm terribly sorry that I did have too much to drink and I fell asleep, but I could have been dead in there.
Yeah.
You know? So I thought, so you just banged on the door and there's a 16-year-old kid in there and you just left him. I thought to myself, how about going to the manager, getting him to open up? We want to check if this young kid's okay. But they just did that. So, oh, he's not there. Oh, well, there you go. So obviously they were quite miffed with me because I've missed the second gig completely by a good hour or more. But I thought myself, well, I was a little bit miffed with them because I thought, guys, you know, anything could have happened to me in there, you know. So again, it's like the education, the school thing, you know. So who's the most responsible? But of course, you know, I was very young. I was a kid. I was caught. I was intoxicated.
Yeah, by the whole thing, like
the touring thing, you know. So yeah, too much to drink. You know, didn't have an alarm clock thing. Didn't say to the guy in the hotel, "Can I set an alarm?" This was something that didn't happen until much later. You know, but yeah, young and naive, inexperienced. But just the fact that we'd done all of this rehearsing for several weeks, for 2 gigs, and I miss a whole gig the second
disaster.
You know, so stuff like that. And you know, I've always said to people, for me in this industry, some of the most important and the best lessons that I've learned have happened, or they've come from the most uncomfortable, maybe even embarrassing situations. You know, sometimes you really need to be put on the spot. You really need to be called out. You need to feel embarrassed. You need to feel awkward, because it's under those circumstances that you really sort yourself out. That you know, because sometimes with lesser mistakes, you just think, oh, whatever, you know, it happens to everybody, you know. But I think, yeah, the real benefit comes from the ones where you really mess up big time. And
where you get roasted.
Yeah, exactly that. And it might be, you know, it might be on a bandstand where we did this one gig with Jools earlier on, and we were in Sheffield. I think it might have been the Lead Mill, I think it was called. And we were on stage doing our gig, and it was the smaller band, 9-piece. And, you know, there's a great artist no longer with us called Edwin Starr, like a soul Motown artist. Now, I wasn't familiar with him at all back then. Now, years later, we got to play with him on the TV show, but his 2 big hits were called War and 25 Miles, I think. Right? Now, the song War, again, these are on YouTube. It's a very specific bass riff. And it's kind of like, and it's like a lot of semiquavers. So the first bit is like dum 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 dum. So that's quite simple. But then the rest of it is like lots of semiquavers. Now, I didn't know this song at all, and I didn't know who Edwin Starr was. Right, so we're at this gig with Jools, just doing our set, and then Edwin happened to be there. Jools knew him, and Jools said, "Oh, do you want to come up and do a song?" And Edwin said, "Yeah, sure." Comes up. Now, usually, if you're going to bring someone up on stage to do a song, it's got to be something fairly knowable, you know. Definitely. So let's do a 12 bar, you know. Let's do something where we vamp on the 1, or it's a 2-chord thing, you know. And he must have said to Jools, "Oh yeah, let's do War." Okay. And then Jools has probably kind of got, I don't know if Jools knew it or not, but he's looking at me across the stage, kind of going, "War, do you know it?" And I couldn't really work out what he was saying because I was across the side of the stage, and all the audience are there watching this, and I don't want to be standing there kind of going, "I don't know, I haven't got a clue, mate," you know, because I didn't want to be embarrassed.
Yeah,
and I didn't want to be that guy, you know. So whether or not Jools was aware that it was bass led, I think. So I'm kind of going, yeah, whatever. I thought to myself, what can this song be? It's probably just a blues or something like that. And of course, I realized that when it starts, the first thing is me and the drums have got to go bum 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 bum.
Yeah, I know the tune. Yeah,
bum, bum, yeah. And I'm just kind of going, and then Jools is looking at me, kind of going, and I'm kind of going. And then Edwin Starr, bless him, forever the professional. He was really sweet about it, and he kind of goes, he's kind of goes to the audience. "Oh, come on, guys! You know they gave it a try. Come on, let's give them a hand like this." And I don't think he was being sarcastic, but you know, I mean, I felt like,
yeah,
this big, and really, I should have just been honest to Jools, even though I couldn't see exactly what he was saying, but I should have just gone,
Yeah, in reality, no one could have played that song if you've never heard
yeah,
it,
yeah,
and it has all
no,
these stabs and stuff. It's not
and
possible.
stops, and I had no clue. So now the thing is with that, it's kind of, you could argue, well, what can you learn from that? Well, it's tricky because you then can't say to yourself, oh my God, I need to learn every song that anyone's ever written.
Exactly.
You
Everyone that might turn
can't.
up in the audience so I can play their
Yeah,
song.
yeah, you can't do that. But I guess what I would have done is I then would have gone and listened to it, and I scrutinized it. I can't remember if I transcribed it. I did at some point transcribe it, but I would have at least, gone to listen to it, and then realized also that in that instance, you need to have the confidence to say, I'm sorry, I don't know it.
Yeah,
You've got to be honest about it, or you'll get scuppered, But it's like on jazz gigs. Sometimes I play with people and they'll call a tune that I don't know, and what will happen is that a jazz gig is slightly different because the idea is that they'll play it around, and the piano player might play a chorus of it, and then what you need to do is listen like crazy. And also, if you've got piano knowledge, then I can look at the piano player's left hand, and I can just say to him, just do one chorus and just hit the roots.
yeah.
And that would be a thing for me. And that's the same with Jools, because where I stand now, I'm looking over at him. And sometimes we'll do stuff that we haven't played for years, and I might not remember it immediately. But because I know the piano keyboard, I know where the notes are, and I just watch his left hand and I follow it. And after one chorus, hopefully I've got it. So sometimes you can do that, but obviously with that particular song, War, it was not a busker.
Wasn't going to happen.
If you didn't know it, you didn't know it. So,
no.
but yeah, it's just how you react to things, and how you, and what you can do about it. If there's something you can do about it at all, sometimes there simply isn't, but at least you just try and remember. Yeah. So in future, I just thought, don't just kind of go, yeah, it'll be fine, I know it. Yeah, it's great. When you don't.
Yeah, that's a good one, because it wasn't your lack of playing ability. It was your lack of confidence just to say, no, can't do this.
Because I was embarrassed because all the audience are looking at me and they just wanted to say, yeah, I know that. It's fine. Let's go. And I didn't. So, whoops. So the egg was on my face anyway.
Well, you learned from it anyway.
Yeah, exactly that. Exactly.
And you have a Savage bass guitar collection, which I saw on YouTube, which I was amazed by. Like, people always say, I have a good one back here, but you've got is that something you've been into over all your years as a pro bassist, kind of like picking them up?
Well, actually, first of all, I have to say that the collection that's on YouTube is almost entirely different now. It's almost changed completely.
Really?
It's crazy. Yeah. Because back then, there was some stuff I had, and it was, and I actually had one Ibanez bass when I had that photo shoot done. I literally had one Ibanez, and now Ibanez makes up the majority of my bass collection. I've probably got sort of like 80 Ibanez now, or 50 or 60 or something like that, because I just fell in love with the vintage ones. And then decided to collect those. And then Ibanez saw that I was really passionate about their older instruments, and then asked me if I wanted to play the more modern stuff. And I said to them, I said, well, yeah, and I like 6-string basses, and I don't think I had one at all at the time. So they started to sort of say, well, we'll try this one, try that one. And 6-string basses for me, I love playing them because they're so versatile. Sometimes on tour and on the TV show, I don't have the space to have multiple instruments. So the main thing is I need an upright bass and I need a bass guitar. And for me, having a 6-string is the obvious choice, because I can do so much more on that. I mean, the low B is more crucial than the high C string is. But even on the thing I like having about the high C is because if I'm sight reading on TV, which I had to do this time around, if you've got the high C string, it means you can play in one hand position for a longer period of time. So you can just move across the board. Whereas if I just had a 4 or 5 string, I would have to be making much bigger leaps to get higher notes. And then, it's quite risky on a TV show when you're sight reading to do these jumps, because there is the possibility you'll lose your place. So with a 6-string, I've got all of those notes pretty much across the board, or I might just have to move one fret. So that's why I'm a big fan of them. But yeah, the collection, I guess, when I was a kid, I used to love collecting. I'm a big horror movie fan. I love old horror, sci-fi, fantasy movies. I grew up watching the Munsters and the Addams Family. So I used to collect bubblegum cards. And I'm a big Planet of the Apes fan as well. So I used to collect Planet of the Ape monster bubblegum cards. I used to collect posters, models, action figures. And I still do. I still do collect that stuff. And someone said to me, once you're a collector, you're always a collector. You'll always find something else to collect. And so I didn't ever start off wanting to collect basses. Like in the early years with Jools, I had my double bass, and I had a couple of Fender Jazz basses, a couple of 70s Fender Jazz, and that was it really. But then I started to get quite interested in them, and sure enough, it started. The obsession kicked in, and yeah, I don't know. I think bass guitars I've probably got about 100 now. I've just got the one double bass, but I've probably got 6 or 7 electric upright basses. I have to say though that in the last couple of years, the whole thing has slowed down. Because now I'm a dad as well. I became a dad. So obviously my priorities have changed a little bit. Because I used to spend a lot of time searching for this stuff. People would say to me, my God, that's so rare. How do you find it? Well, because I'd spend every waking moment on the internet. I would just like all day and all evening when I had any spare time, going on all the obvious places and going to like, guitar shops and vintage shop, all that kind of stuff. I mean, I put the time and effort into it. It was not easy, and a lot of my instruments came from the States, so I had to import them myself, or from Japan or whatever. So it was hard work having that, and the maintenance of them as well. It is, but yeah, I really love doing it, and I also enjoyed. I've got lots of Fenders. I've got lots of particularly P basses. I've got a lot of old P basses, but not 60s stuff. It's just more 70s. Kind of things, and 70s and early 80s. But for me, it was more about the quirkiness. I kind of like more unusual instruments, more so than just going for just vintage and just that's it. It's just about the vintage. I kind of like unusual, quirky things. But yeah, I've definitely slowed down on that because I'm just thinking it did get out of hand at one point.
Well, if you have 100 basses and you live in London, it's not ideal.
Yeah.
Like.
And also, yeah, I mean, the sort of space thing becomes an issue, and then if you've got to pay for storage, that gets expensive. But also, I think it was as much to do with having a family this late in life. Sort of that changed a lot of things. I don't think my wife Lucy is going to be too thrilled at sort of many more coming in.
No, and you can't use the old trick of buying all your guitars in the same color, so your wife doesn't notice.
Yeah,
being a musician herself, she'd know what the difference between them is.
I've managed to sneak a few in, but I she's far too shrewd for me to sneak anymore. So, but I'm pretty happy. And to be honest, since I started to use, and I still use, and bearing in mind, I don't use all of these. I mean, some of them were just bought as collectible pieces, and because I just wanted to have them. I mean, some of them are not played, and I know people would say that's sacrilege, it's crazy, but it's just the way it is. And but I do still play some of the vintage ones. But really, I mostly play the modern day Ibanez, and they are predominantly 6-stringers. And in fact, I'm getting a new one quite soon. It's a brand new model for them. It's only just come out, and it's a 6-string BTB, but it's fan fretted, and it's longer scale length than usual. And I'm very excited about that. I think I've got a couple of fan fretted ones of theirs, but this is a longer scale. So that I'm going to get that quite soon. But yeah, and the thing is, people also say to me, why that brand? Because a lot of people associate Ibanez with student entry-level instruments. Now the problem there is that my first ever 5-string bass was an Ibanez, and I got it back in the late 80s, and it was a 5-string Roadster. But it was really weird because it was a 4-string neck, and they just squeezed an extra string on there. So the what do you call it?
The string spacing was
tiny. The string spacing. Yeah, it was crazy. And because I was playing a lot of slap stuff then, it wasn't ideal for me. So I didn't have it for long. Ironically, now I've got 2 of those in my collection. Later on, I got them out of nostalgia. But the thing is, the really great era for some of these particular basses was when Sting was using them in the late 70s, early 80s, and they're the Musician series. They're some of my favorite vintage instruments ever. Probably my favorite 4-string bass is an Ibanez Musician MC924, and I've got quite a few of them. But they are still 4-string instruments, and as great as they are, on the Jools gig, I need as much versatility as possible. So I just embrace the 6-string side of it. But the thing with Ibanez, people get very confused with this brand because, if you go into a high street music shop and you see the Ibanez on the wall, they are the student entry level models. They're the cheaper models. So people have got this impression of Ibanez that they're just like a cheaper, lesser brand. It's because they haven't seen the high end stuff. Exactly. And neither had I. So when Ibanez saw me, I think it was Bass Guitar magazine, and Jools and I were featured. Well, I was featured in the magazine, and Jools and I they put us on the cover, and I'm holding one of my vintage Ibanez, and Ibanez saw this and they thought, oh wow, this is kind of great that this attention is being given to our brand. So that's when they got in touch and said, would you like to use the newer instruments? And all I could think about was the stuff I'd seen in the high street shops. And I'm thinking not sure. Yeah, hang on a minute. So I went to a warehouse of theirs, and they start to bring out these high-end BTBs, sound gears, prestige, and I'm thinking, where have all these come from? Yeah. I've never seen these before in my life, and they were stunning, absolutely beautiful. And I just thought, this is nuts. So I picked up the first 6-string, this BTB, had Nordstrom pickups in there, and it was just glorious. I just thought to myself, man, I have to have this bass. It was the first one I picked up. But then I'm looking at the others thinking, actually, I quite like that one as well. I think I quite like that one. Eventually, I did end up with quite a few of them. But the thing is, I said to them, I said, this is crazy. I said, I've never seen these in shops before, and this is the problem. Other people are not seeing these. Yeah. So the name Ibanez is always being associated with the lower end student stuff. And I said, this is the reason why the reputation is very, it's a confusing brand. But the trouble is, they don't want to fill music shops with this high end stuff, because obviously they are a bit more expensive. Yeah. And then they don't want to lose the student entry level market. They don't want to do that, no. So there's always been a slight, and because their range is so crazy, it's so vast. The different models they have are just nuts, and because they're just numbered as well. They don't have names like they used to, like the studio or the musician bass. They've just got like almost serial numbers. So it's very easy for them just to make loads and loads more, because they haven't got to think of a great name. They've just got to have a new number.
I don't think it's a good system, because it's like, it doesn't have the name recognition. You're like, you see someone playing it, you're like, oh, that's the new whatever name you want to give it. Like,
I have to keep saying to people, this is my new BTB 1606, my new BTB 1826, my BTB 1404, and it just doesn't, it's not very evocative or anything like that. So, but make no mistake, their higher end stuff is better than anything else I've played out there. And what happened is, I have owned some very high-end, handmade, so-called boutique instruments made by luthiers that everyone knows. And I'm not going to name names because it just wouldn't be fair. But all I can say is, the old adage that all that glitters is not gold.
Yeah.
So I have been quite sort of surprised and often disappointed at some of the more boutique high-end stuff that I've had, and the ones that I've paid for, thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds. There's been a couple of exceptions, but there's been some where, and I just got to the point where I'm thinking, why am I doing this? Why am I spending a fortune on instruments? Because it's got a certain name attached to it. Yeah. Or certain players are using it, and the ones that I've ended up with, I've either not been impressed with, I haven't bonded with them, or they, I've been extremely disappointed with. So it was almost like going with Ibanez, who were almost kind of the underdog in some ways, because of the association with the more beginner instruments. And I'm then discovering that these are as good as, if not better, than these boutique so-called boutique instruments. It was almost like a rebellion. I rebelled against
Yeah.
this thing, you know. And of course, the Ibanez are like less than half price, or more than that, you know. And I love them. I've never had any problems with them. I think they're stunning instruments. They've done everything I've wanted them to do. They're a great company, very supportive. So yeah, that's pretty much my brand. I mean, having said that, there are times if I'm doing something where using an old P bass, the flat wound strings, is going to be a better choice on a track or a recording sonically.
Yeah.
Now, there's no problem with that. It's fine for me to do that. I'm not under this very sort of strict sort of contract where you can't use anything else, you know. But I would still predominantly choose Ibanez as my brand now. And I rarely look at anything else. You know, if I go into a shop or if I go online, I'm just interested in what they're doing. What are they making? I you know, because I'm so happy.
But it's cool that they do bring out a lot of models, because, you know, Fender recently they have brought out some models, but say Gibson don't bring out many new basses very often.
Yeah,
right?
sure.
But Gary Willis is endorsed by Ibanez. He has a signature one, doesn't he?
Yeah, there's well, the thing is that it's interesting with the endorsers, and they have signature models. So there's the bass players. There's Gary Willis. There is Gerald Veasley. I mean, there's obviously Thundercats. I mean, there's a couple of other guys, but they do, interestingly, they tend to be fusion players. They tend to be more jazz fusion players or metal guys. Okay. And then it's interestingly in the guitar world, they're all kind of jazz players. So there's George Benson, there's Pat Metheny, John Schofield, all these kind of guys. Now, I think when I got involved with them, the thing that they were really pleased with me was because I'm like a working bass player. You know, I'm not a fusion guy. I'm not a metal guy. Anything like that. I'm a session guy, working player that has to cover a lot of styles. And I think that for them was that's what they wanted, and that's what they still want. You know, because they know that a lot of people out there, a lot of younger players, they're not going to end up being high octane fusion soloists.
No.
They're just going to be doing gigs. They just want to be working players like me. So I think that Ibanez they embraced me because of that, because I'm just like a working player, and they wanted to appeal to that kind of player more. So I became, I guess, a bit of an ambassador for the working muser.
The bassists, you might say, like fellows in the trenches playing the normal kind of bass lines and stuff.
Exactly, you know. And the thing is, we've talked about a signature model, and I've said to them, to be honest with you, I don't really need one, and I don't particularly want one. Now, I know a number of players out there that have ended up with signature models. Now, I don't want to go into too much detail on this. I don't want to upset anybody, and I certainly wouldn't name names. But I think it's, don't get me wrong, it's very flattering. It's very flattering.
Totally.
It's a great honor, you know. But I think a lot of it is ego led, you know. And it's also one thing if a company comes to you and they're very keen to make you a signature artist. But the thing, you know, you can go to a luthier now and you can say, I want a signature instrument, and they'll kind of go, yeah, okay, but we'll make you one with it. But that's you going to them asking for that. So is that a signature or is that a custom?
That's definitely a custom, I think.
You know, it's very different to a big company coming to you and saying, we want to make a so-and-so signature model for you. That's a very different thing, you know. And for me, like I said, I see a lot of that, and it's very ego based, and you know, that's each to their own. I'm not being critical. It's just an observation. But from my point of view, I actually really love what their stock instruments. Okay, and I always have done. Now they did make me. They've talked about it, and I said I don't really need one. I don't need one. Why? I've got the gig. I'm working. Everything's fine, and I've got your instruments, and they're all off the peg. All of my Ibanez were off the peg instruments, and they kept saying, and I said, well, look, if you want to do something, why don't we just do a custom one? And they made me a couple of years ago a BTB, so the same body shape. I got to choose the wood on top. I got to choose the color, and I chose, like, I think it was Bill Poplar, and I said, can we have a blood red stain to reflect my love of horror movies? And I said, I really like Nordstrom pickups, so let's put those in there. Electronically, the only thing different, I wanted a 0 fret. And the only thing differently we did, on their older instruments, you had like a 3-band active EQ, but you also had a passive tone control. And they stopped doing that on their modern instruments. And I really missed that, because I like to use the passive tone control on the vintage ones in conjunction with the active electronics. So I also said, if you're going to do this custom one, can you put me a separate passive tone control? Which is what they did. That was probably the most dramatic difference.
Yeah.
And I love it. You know, it's a great bass, but it's a one-off custom bass. It's not a signature model, because to me, that's the other thing as well. If I was ever going to do that, and I'm really in no rush to do it, if they were ever going to do a signature model for whatever reason, I would want to work more on it than that, because it's almost like, you know, with certain companies, and they'll just change the color of something, and that will be something signature, or they'll move the screws like an inch that way, or they'll move the thumb rest this way, and they'll use they'll use different screws in the bridge, and I'm thinking, does that really constitute?
I think the nature of it is that, like, guitars have been around so long now, the formula has almost been perfected. So that's they're like, I love the model you have, but to make it a signature, I suppose, just move the thumb rest or the screw or something.
You know. And to me, that's really clutching at straws. You know, that's kind of, I think for me, if that was going to happen, I'd want something a bit more. I'd want something a bit more radical. And there again, there's a problem there, because if you do something too radical, that's going to sort of put people off. If it's going to be too different or too wacky, because that will make it different enough to get attention, because people go, oh wow, look, he's had that and that there. But on a practical level, is that going to appeal to people? I liken it to there was an episode of the Simpsons once, and I think Homer discovers he's got a long lost brother who is really ultra successful, and he owns this huge car company. He's like a billionaire, and he brings Homer in, and he's got all these guys working for him, and they're all great designers and technicians, whatever. And he said, look, I want Homer in that, because he's the guy. He's the guy next door. He's the regular Joe. If anyone knows about what the people want, it's Homer. So you lot, you know, just shut up, and Homer's going to come in and design this new car. And of course, he hasn't got a clue, has he? So Homer designs this car, and he gets some veil at the end of it, and it's got like a bubble top, like some spaceship, and it's got flames coming out the back of it, and it's got all these ridiculous. And of course, the guy thinks, "Oh my God!" And he said, "I'm ruined. I'm ruined. You've bankrupted me." You know. And obviously, it's an over exaggeration, but you know, the point I'm trying to make is that, you know, for me to have a signature model, there'd have to be key things just to make it different and interesting and unusual to what's already out there. But it's how far you take that to the point where is it just too out there for people, and people will kind of go, well, that's ridiculous. Why has he done that? What, you know? So you can go too far the other way. So it's a fine line to get that right, and that's the reason why I've never been any rush to have one. And I said to them also, I said, now I'm an official endorser for Ibanez. I said, what better endorsement could you wish for, where I'm actually using the stock instruments that anybody else can go and buy from shops.
Exactly,
you know,
off the shelf. Is the most important thing, like.
I have got this one-off custom thing, but it's not that different from the others. It's more to do with the woods and the color of it, you know. But I'm using certain BTB, certain sound gear ones, and there's nothing custom about them. If you order them from anywhere or go and buy them from there, you're getting the same instrument that I'm getting. So I said to me, that's a better endorsement of the product, that I don't need to have this tweaked. I don't need to have this altered or customized, or I don't need to have a brand new. I'm playing what everyone else can play. So, you know, they seem to be happy with that. But I mean, maybe one day we'll do something. But again, I'd probably just be happy with another custom bass with some changes. And the signature model, I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't think.
I'd go for it personally if I got asked anyway. I'd be like, oh, that sounds great, but you're obviously different to me. You're like, you're not sure about it.
But also, I'm really not. I'm not famous at all. So then, why would people want to buy an instrument with my name on it? As most people don't know who I am and what I do. So
Funny you say that. Like, you could tour the whole world and it would mean nothing to most people. But the fact that they see you on the telly every Saturday night, to the average person in the street, that means you are famous more than
well, yeah,
that. You're
maybe.
doing well. If you're on the telly, that's kind of like a barometer.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. For me, I'm just glad. I'm just glad that I've been able to do this for as long as I have. Because I mean, I didn't expect any of this to happen. I didn't know you could make a living from it. And the fact, I always say it's better than working for a living. Which and I have tried that. I have had a couple of jobs prior to this, very briefly, but it's a very unique thing. But again, it's I've always been very diligent with and very conscientious about the actual craft itself. I haven't ever taken it for granted. I'm still always practicing and always sort of studying, and I'm an enthusiast about the instruments. I mean, I go to conventions, I go to trade shows if and when I can. I genuinely love like every aspect of it. Obviously these days with a family thing, I probably don't. I'm not going to get to do that as often as I'd like to. But yeah, I mean, the main thing is for me, it's the work, it's the craft, it's doing the best job you can, and to maintain that as well, not to sort of take your foot off the gas and think, oh, I've done it all now, I can just take it easy, because the trouble is, the more you do it and the more of a reputation you get, there's more to lose.
People are watching you. They're watching
well,
to see
yeah,
what you're doing.
exactly. You're scrutinized a little bit more, so you can't really, completely just be too flippant and casual about the whole thing. You still have to. I mean, it's quite weird the way we when we record the New Year's Eve show, because prior to COVID, the room was full of other bands. There was like 5 or 6 other bands, and a big audience as well. And of course, whenever we had to play, bearing in mind the other bands, their bass players have been playing their music for years, whereas we've only just been playing these songs the day before.
Yeah.
or some of the rehearsals, we actually rehearse on the day of the recording. That's how late things are, kind of things, right at the last minute rehearsals. And we've got to play them as well as the people did on the original recordings. We've got to play it as accurately and also authentically, and we've only been playing them for a day or half a day. And then when the other bands used to be there, you're also very aware that there's like 6 other bass players in the room, in all the other bands, and they're all kind of there like this. No pressure at all, but of course, the last 2 years, because of the COVID, they've not been able to have any of the bands there. It's just us playing what we would normally play, X amount of songs, and then in between where the other bands would play, they put stock footage of previous Hootenanny shows and they've got plenty of archive footage to use. But it was definitely, it's a bit more chilled because you haven't got an audience and you haven't got like 6 other bass players kind of watching you, kind of going, he's going to make a mistake, So yeah, that was a bit more relaxing, I have to say.
You have to keep the chops up for when it comes back as well, because the other bands will be back soon and the audience.
Yeah,
so that's
exactly that, and so yeah, it's like, but again, I think my impetus really for who and what I am, ironically, came from failure, and it came from failure at school. It came from, because I've got 2 older brothers, 8 and 11 years older than me, and they're very, very intelligent guys, very, very clever. I admire them so much, and they both play some guitar, not professionally, but they were mentors to me at home, more so than my parents, because they were obviously younger generation. So they were the ones that were bringing instruments into the house and pianos and playing music. I mean, the funny thing is that they were listening to all the artists that I've ended up playing with. So they're probably really annoyed at me because they're thinking, well, hang on, we bought all the records and these were our heroes. And our snotty-nosed little brother, he's the one that ends up actually performing with them all those years later. So probably hate me, really. But yeah, they went to good schools as well. They went to grammar schools and church schools. and again, I don't want to at all put the blame on the school I went to. So I think it was as much to do with me, but I just wasn't ready for it. I just wasn't prepared. I wasn't motivated. I was not confident. And I think for me, it's like my education started when I left school, or just at the end of it, you know. So I think for me, because I don't have any O levels and A levels and all this kind of stuff, I think after that, because I was so disappointed, and I thought maybe I'd let my parents down because I hadn't done well academically. I mean, they were thrilled I was playing an instrument. They were really thrilled. But I still felt bad for them. And I felt bad about myself as well. So I just kind of think that after that, that's the reason why I then became this compulsive student. And then I thought to myself, okay, this isn't going to happen again. If I'm going to apply myself to one thing, I'm going to really do it to the nth degree. I'm going to practice, I'm going to study, I'm going to learn, I'm going to whatever I can do. And I think that has been my propulsion and my motivation all through my professional career. It was the fact that I failed at school academically. You know, so maybe had I been far more successful and I'd have got O levels and A levels coming up my ears, you know, maybe I'd have got cocky about it. And maybe I'd have wanted to do something related to those qualifications. But I think because I got so fed up of seeing like D's, E's, and F's and reports where it says disappointing exam result, must do better. You know, ironically, the only time I ever got an A was in sports and my trombone lessons. My trombone teacher always gave me A1, and he said, Dave's making great progress. So thank goodness, right at the last minute, I found my bliss. I found my passion. Yeah.
That's amazing. The two roads would have diverged very differently if you hadn't met that man who gave you the chance on the trombone.
Sure, that's the reason why when I met him and his wife recently at our gig, I made sure I applied them with quite a few bottles of champagne because I thought it was the least I could. At least they probably didn't thank me for it the next morning, but yeah, I definitely wanted to show my gratitude one way or the other.
Well, it's fair play to you. You gave him a good shout out on this anyway as well, so he'll appreciate that.
Well, that's great. And I said to Jools as well, I said, listen, my trombone teacher's here tonight. His name's Phil Johnson. And I said, you know, he's retired from teaching, but he's still, you know, he's still around, still doing everything he does. So I said, yeah, if you give him a shout out at the gig, this is in Birmingham, this is at the Symphony Hall in Birmingham. I said, I'd be very grateful because Jools doesn't normally do that, you know, like whether it's someone's birthday, it's not the thing that he does.
Yeah.
But I emphasize, I said, this guy changed my life. You know, Phil Johnson, my old trombone teacher, he changed my life. It wasn't for him, I wouldn't be here, you know. So Jools made a big fuss of him on there. So thank you for letting me mention him here as well, because if it wasn't for him, I don't think very little of this would have happened.
Well, thanks for coming on. That was one of our most epic chats, I think, on Basscraft.
I can't apologize enough.
No, it was brilliant. I'm going to put all your links in the description anyway. All the videos we chatted about and everything will all be down there.
Oh, bless you. Thank you very much. My pleasure.